As you may know, in the original story, Goku would go to Earth to escape the destruction of Planet Vegeta. But this time, something would happen that would change the entire story of Dragon Ball and the events to come. Gine was very hesitant about Bardock's idea of sending Kakarot to Earth. For starters, she didn't want to abandon her son, and she didn't trust his ability to survive on his own due to his extremely low power level. Despite Bardock's attempts to ease her fears by explaining that Earth was a planet with very low power levels, it was still not enough to convince Gine to let her son go to another place without them. She believed they should go with him as well. At that moment, Bardock was deep in thought. He realized they could be tracked, but only if someone had a tracker. Then an idea struck him. Bardock, snapping out of his thoughts, decided to agree with Gine's insistence, assuring her that they would also go to Earth. However, he explained that they wouldn't travel together or in the same space capsule as Kakarot to avoid drawing attention from trackers. He told her she could reach Kakarot a few days later after he had managed to steal another space capsule for her. But Gine began to worry about Bardock, asking what he planned to do to escape Planet Vegeta and Frieza himself. Bardock told her not to worry, that he would come up with something, a response that Gine reluctantly accepted, though it left a bitter taste in her mouth. From there, things would proceed just as in the original story, with them bidding farewell to Kakarot as he left for Earth. A few days later, they managed to repeat the process, and it was now Gine's turn to be sent to Earth. Bardock set the same coordinates he used for Kakarot's space capsule, and Gine entered the capsule, bidding him farewell and wishing him luck, hoping they would meet again soon. From this point on, events would unfold as in the original story. Bardock attempted to change Planet Vegeta's fate, but he was unsuccessful. When Frieza launched his attack to destroy Planet Vegeta, Bardock tried to stop him, but the overwhelming power difference between him and Frieza left him on the losing side of the clash. Just as he thought he was about to die, Frieza's attack was so powerful that it sent Bardock flying to the surface of Planet Vegeta, where he landed near the space pods. Only one pod remained, and although it was very old, Bardock didn't hesitate for a second. He climbed into the ship, set the coordinates for where he had sent Gine and Kakarot, and prepared for departure, escaping the atmosphere of Planet Vegeta at the last moment before the explosion reached his ship. Meanwhile, Gine was already near Earth, entering its atmosphere and finally reaching her destination. She exited the space capsule, relieved to have arrived at the same destination as her son. Her first instinct was to leave the capsule and fly around the area where she'd landed, hoping to find her son's capsule. However, she realized it would have been much easier if she had a tracker, as she still couldn't sense Ki. It took her a few hours to find Kakarot's capsule. Seeing it, she was overjoyed, thinking her son was still inside. But to her surprise, he was nowhere to be found. Instead, it seemed someone had taken him. This left Gine feeling nervous, fearing that something had happened to her son. She resumed her search but ultimately found nothing, unable to locate her son without a tracker, a technology Saiyans had become highly dependent on for navigation. As night fell, Gine felt devastated, unable to hold back her emotions and anxiety over not finding her son. She prayed that he was safe and well, at least for that night, and hoped there wouldn't be a full moon. Suddenly, she spotted a small house on a hill in the distance. She headed toward it to find a place to spend the night. Upon reaching the house, she entered, surprised to find it wasn't abandoned. Someone seemed to live there, but she didn't dwell on it, exhausted as she was. She sat on one of the beds, drying her tears over her earlier worries. Shortly after, she prepared to lie down, but before she could sleep, she heard a noise, which put her on high alert. She saw an old man at the door, holding a baby who, unexpectedly, was Kakarot. Gine jumped for joy, embracing her son tightly through tears, overjoyed to be reunited with him. Gohan was confused by her reaction and, moreover, by the identity of this stranger sleeping on one of his beds. He asked her who she was. She replied that she was the mother of the baby, whose name was Kakarot, and that her own name was Gine. She expressed her deep gratitude to the old man for taking care of her son during the short time they'd been apart. Gohan told her it was a pleasure and that it was no problem. However, he was still puzzled as to why both she and her son Goku had a tail. Gine would feel slightly annoyed at the old man for calling her son Goku when she had just told him his name was Kakarot, but Gohan found that name quite unpleasant and thought Goku suited the little one much better. Seeing how her son was squirming with laughter and had a face full of joy hearing that name, Gine would relent and accept that perhaps Goku was indeed a better name if that's what her son preferred, though it saddened her that he'd chosen a name of earthly origin over one from his Saiyan roots. With that matter cleared up, Gohan would again express curiosity as to why they both have tails. Gine would simply tell him it was a long story, but one she'd be willing to share. Eager to learn more about the origins of mother and son, Gohan would invite them inside to warm up a bit from the cold outside, so they could share their story more comfortably, a proposal Gine would gratefully accept. Gohan would also invite Gine to enjoy some of the food he had prepared earlier for little Goku, amazed by the appetite of an adult Saiyan, which was much greater than that of her young son, Kakarot, despite her being a woman. He could scarcely imagine the amount of food an adult Saiyan could consume. After dinner, they would get ready to sleep, with Gohan offering Gine his larger bed to share with her son. Meanwhile, Bardock, badly injured from his encounter with Frieza, was struggling to survive. He hoped his battered body could endure the journey, as the outdated space pod he was in calculated that it would take a week to reach Earth, a journey that would be both long and arduous in his current state. Returning to Gine, she would continue sleeping alongside Goku, while Gohan had awoken and was preparing breakfast. Eventually, the Saiyan mother would wake up along with her son, with Gohan greeting them and offering a breakfast suitable for their appetites. Though Gohan was a fairly mediocre cook by Earth's culinary standards, to Gine his food was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. During breakfast, now having recovered from the long day before, Gine would go into greater detail about her and Kakarot's origins, sharing an extensive account of the Saiyan race, their tales, Planet Vegeta, Frieza, King Cold, and the horrible work they had to do for the benefit of the latter two, an account that would horrify and chill the kind old man to the bone. He couldn't believe that a woman as kind and gentle as Gine could come from such a savage and ruthless race as the one she was describing. However, remembering the early days with Goku after he arrived on Earth, he could also understand how an adult Saiyan might be. Realizing more and more to his own horror that he was surrounded by beings with a destructive potential far beyond earthly standards, he seriously doubted that even his master, Master Roshi, could do anything against such powerful beings as the Saiyans. Despite being terrified by the destructive capacities and potential of the race to which Goku and Gine belonged, Gohan would ultimately accept them into his home, having deeply empathized with their situation and understanding that they wouldn't be here if they were like the rest of their race. Therefore, he would offer Gine all the hospitality she needed in his humble home, and of course for her son Goku too. Gine would feel deeply grateful for Gohan's kind words, accepting his offer to stay and live with him. Back with Bardock, he was now approaching the solar system where Earth was located, though barely holding on as his body nearly collapsed. He wondered if he would make it, but the thought of his wife and son would keep him going despite the immense pain he was enduring. Meanwhile, with Gine, she was taking care of Goku while Gohan went to a nearby village to do some shopping. Gine would realize she was starting to like life on Earth quite a bit, finding it, in the end, a good place to stay and raise her son Kakarot if they were now doomed to never return to their home planet, which by that point Frieza had likely destroyed. She felt sad thinking that Bardock probably couldn't control his Saiyan pride and had died fighting Frieza, accepting with a heavy heart that she would likely never see him again. But just as she lamented, she suddenly saw a large object approaching at high speed from the sky. She realized it wasn't just any object, but a space pod, and at that moment, Gine's hopes reignited as she wondered if the person inside could be who she thought it was. Carrying her son Kakarot, she would dash at full speed toward the location where the pod was about to crash, eager to confirm her hopes. As she flew, she wondered if it really could be Bardock, or perhaps Raditz. Who knows? Anything was possible now, and regaining hope filled her with joy as she hurried to the crash site to confirm who was inside. Gine arrived at the landing site both worried and excited. She decided to approach the space pod, hoping it was either her husband or her own son. Finally, the space pod began to open, revealing much to Gine's delight that it was indeed her husband Bardock, though he was in very poor condition. Holding her son in her arms, Gine didn't hesitate for a second to pull Bardock out of the space pod, wondering what kind of torture Frieza might have inflicted on him to leave in such a state. Bardock then started to explain to Gine that he had managed to escape thanks to an old pod that was, fortunately, still operational. He had been extremely lucky, as he wasn't detected by Frieza's army radars. However, he was still furious and frustrated for not being able to prevent Planet Vegeta's tragic fate. Gine tried to soothe Bardock's frustration, reminding him that in the end, they survived and escaped with their son, avoiding the fate that awaited them if they had done nothing. After that, Gine took Bardock and Goku to Gohan's house, trying her best to treat Bardock's injuries with the few resources available. Though these rudimentary methods couldn't match the efficiency of the healing pods they had on Planet Vegeta. A few hours later, Gohan finally returned home and, to his surprise, found Gine, Goku, and another individual he didn't recognize. Bardock introduced himself to Gohan, giving a brief summary of the entire situation. After hearing the story, everything became clearer to Gohan thanks to Gine's prior explanation a few days later. In any case, he had no problem letting the two Saiyans stay in his home, as he found living in these mountains in the middle of nowhere rather dull. The Saiyan parents were incredibly grateful, feeling fortunate to have found such a hospitable and kind host on Earth. Eventually, the couple and their son adapted to this new life they were forced into, raising their child as best they could while coming to terms with the fact that their planet and entire race were lost forever to the depths of history. Years passed peacefully as they lived with Gohan in these mountains. However, Goku grew to be very different from the original story. He had a less childish and more serious personality since he hadn't experienced the accident that caused the blow to his head. Moreover, having his parents with him from the beginning, he learned to control his tail and master flight techniques, increasing his power level to the extent of matching his power from the early martial arts tournament arc. This advantage would prove beneficial for the events that would unfold in the near future. During this time, Gohan gifted Goku a sacred staff, for which Goku was incredibly grateful. A few days later, a purple-haired girl arrived at Gohan's house, now also the Saiyan family's home, and knocked on the door. She introduced herself to the Saiyans and Gohan as Bulma, daughter of Dr. Brief, though her social class or wealth didn't matter much to them. She explained why she had come, telling them about the Dragon Balls, and mentioning that one of them was in their home. Out of curiosity, Gohan showed the Dragon Ball to Bulma. Seeing it, she confirmed it was the one she was looking for and tried to persuade Gohan to give it to her. Gohan was hesitant, unsure if he should give up the Dragon Ball. Then, to his surprise, Goku spoke up, saying that if the Dragon Ball was truly important to him, he could give it to him instead of Bulma. Goku offered to join her on the journey to find the other Dragon Balls that she still needed to collect. After considering it, Gohan decided to give Bulma the Dragon Ball on the condition that she allow Goku to accompany her to find the others. After thinking it over, Bulma agreed, and Gohan handed her the Dragon Ball. The Saiyan parents weren't too worried, knowing that the power levels on this planet were weak and couldn't compare to the terrible foes in Frieza's army. In any case, Goku accompanied Bulma on her journey, having the same adventures as in the original story. However, this time he found it much easier to defeat his enemies since he was much stronger thanks to his parents. After finishing the Dragon Ball quest and summoning the dragon, Goku returned home, welcomed by his parents and Gohan, enjoying a few days with his family before heading off to train with Master Roshi, Gohan's former teacher. The training, while beneficial, was less impactful due to the rigorous training he had already undergone with his father, but he still improved noticeably. Later, he signed up for the World Martial Arts Tournament, winning all of his matches. This time, knowing what would happen if he looked at the full moon, he didn't transform into an Ozaru, and after a tough battle, he defeated Jackie Chun. Following this, Goku used his prize money to treat his friends to a meal, enjoying a great time together. After the feast, Goku prepared for another adventure. Before setting off, he said goodbye to his friends and started his journey. Everything went as usual, except Goku was much stronger at this point. 3 years passed since the first tournament he had participated in, and the next tournament was held. Everyone signed up and began their battles, and once again, events unfolded as they did in the original story, with Goku facing Tien Shin Han. Although the fight was challenging, Goku ultimately emerged victorious as his power level was slightly higher than Tien's, enough to secure a win against the Triclops. After that thrilling tournament, Goku again invited his friends to eat. However, Goku forgot his staff, so Krillin offered to fetch it for him as a favor, showing his helpful nature. Goku was grateful for his friend's kindness. A few minutes later, feeling uneasy about his friend's delay and sensing that something terrible might have happened, Goku rushed to the tournament locker room. To everyone's horror, he found his best friend dead, while the tournament announcer was barely conscious, explaining that they had been attacked by someone calling himself the son of King Piccolo. This news deeply alarmed and terrified Master Roshi, but Goku was too furious to hesitate. He asked Bulma for the Dragon Radar and flew off at top speed to find his friend's killer, ignoring the worried warnings of Master Roshi. A few moments later, Goku would find Tambourine, and upon reaching him in the air, he wouldn't hesitate for a second to kill him and reclaim the Dragon Ball he had stolen. Then, due to extreme exhaustion from having flown at such high speeds following a long tournament where he fought Tien Shinhan, Goku would fall to the ground completely unconscious from the sheer fatigue. After losing consciousness, he would be found by Yajirobe, who would take him to Korin's tower, where he would recover thanks to a Senzu Bean. Korin would then tell Goku that the only way to defeat King Piccolo was by drinking the ultra-sacred water of the gods, a suggestion that Goku, seeing the urgency of the situation, would accept. He would drink this extremely dangerous water, remaining unconscious for nearly an entire day. A day in which all of Goku's friends would attempt to stop the threat, ultimately leading to the deaths of Chiaotzu and Roshi. Meanwhile, Tien would be practicing the evil containment wave technique to have a more concrete chance at defeating King Piccolo, in case he couldn't do it with his own power and brute strength. Eventually, Goku would awaken, displaying a power that, for the time, was relatively high, boasting a battle power of 350. After thanking Master Korin for the water that had granted him more power than he previously had, he would set off flying in the direction where King Piccolo was, arriving just in time to save a critically injured Tien, who had been beaten by Piccolo's son. Without hesitation, Goku would kill all of King Piccolo's offspring before facing him, engaging in a battle with a rhythm and choreography relatively similar to the one they had in the original story. However, this time, Goku had a complete advantage over King Piccolo, neither taking nearly as much damage as in the original story, nor experiencing the same difficulties against this foe. It was even more satisfying for him to avenge his friend's deaths with this power advantage he had over the demon. But eventually, upon noticing his enemy's high regeneration and adaptability, Goku would decide to end it all with a powerful ki projection attack, launching himself at King Piccolo and piercing right through his abdomen, a wound too severe for him to regenerate from. With little time left to live, King Piccolo would spit out an egg so that his son could avenge him before finally dying. Following this epic final attack, Goku would help Tien recover from the beating he had endured, with the Triclops unable to believe how powerful Goku had become. Shortly after, Kami would appear, surprising Goku, who thought that King Piccolo himself had survived and was ready to fight again. However, Kami would stop him, explaining that he was not exactly King Piccolo, at least not entirely, and was only the good part of that same entity. After properly introducing himself to Goku and explaining his connection to Piccolo and the egg he had expelled before dying, Kami would take Goku to his palace in the sky, where he would restore Shenron, allowing the Dragon Balls to be reactivated and ready for use, thus enabling the resurrection of all who had died at the hands of King Piccolo and his children. Afterward, Goku would train with Kami for a year and a half, where he would finally learn to control his ki more effectively and to sense others' ki, a fascinating skill for the young Saiyan and a highly useful one. It would remind him of his parents' stories about the purpose of the scouters used by Frieza's army, making him wonder if his parents could also learn to sense ki in this way. But eventually, both Goku and Kami would realize that his training wouldn't yield much more benefit beyond the initial learning phase of ki control. Goku would decide that the most effective course would be to continue training with his father, now that Bardock was much closer to his level. Thinking he could achieve much better results by training with his parent for the remainder of the time before the next tournament, he would thank Kami for all his teachings, bid him farewell, and promise that Piccolo would not be a problem, assuring him that he would handle everything himself. He would then fly back to his home at Mount Paozu. After another year and a half of living again with his parents at Mount Paozu and training non-stop with his father Bardock, Goku would realize that contrary to his initial thoughts, his father still had a long way to go to catch up to him. Nonetheless, Bardock had become much stronger, possessing a relatively high battle power for that time, with a battle power of 1500. Finally, the time would come to head to the World Martial Arts Tournament, where Goku would reunite with his friends. The young Saiyan and the others would register to participate in the tournament, while Piccolo would approach Goku, telling him that he would avenge his father for what had happened 3 years ago. At that point, due to the immense pressure Piccolo had placed on himself to surpass Goku's enormous power, mistakenly thinking he was an Earthling, he had managed, through sheer effort and subjecting his body to indescribable suffering, to achieve a battle power of 1200. The tournament would then begin, with the preliminary and main fights happening just as in the original story. Goku would dominate everyone just as he did back then, but here his superiority over all his opponents, rivals, and friends would be even more apparent. Reuniting with Chi-Chi, he would agree to marry her after Gine had explained to him what marriage was after his first adventure with Bulma. Then came Goku's final fight against Piccolo. To Goku's surprise, Piccolo was much stronger than he had anticipated, grateful that he had had the idea to train with his father before the tournament. Otherwise, Piccolo would have easily killed him. Despite their relative equality in power, Goku would gradually regain control of the fight, realizing that by removing his weighted clothes, he had a significant advantage over Piccolo. Even though Piccolo fought with everything he had against his opponent, the Saiyan would ultimately defeat him. Not without difficulty, but certainly without ending up as injured as in the original story. However, Goku would still take a Senzu Bean, noticing that this time the effects of the recovery felt different from previous times, unaware that this was due to Zenkai boosts. Then, to everyone's surprise, he would ask Yajirobe for another Senzu Bean, much to his friend's horror, as he intended to give it to Piccolo himself. Piccolo would immediately recover from his injuries, utterly confused but also frustrated by the tremendous humiliation he had endured. He would swear that he would eventually achieve his revenge no matter how long it took, before reluctantly leaving, proclaiming Goku the martial arts tournament champion for the third time. Soon after, Goku and Chi-Chi would organize their wedding, bringing together their closest relatives. Bardock, Gine, Ox King, and Grandpa Gohan would be present to witness the union. Both parents would be happy that their son Kakarot had found a strong-willed woman on Earth, giving them hope that the Saiyan race could continue through the union of these two. Not long after, their hopes as parents would be fulfilled when Chi-Chi gave birth to Goku's first child, named Gohan in honor of his grandfather, with Bardock and Gine equally proud to now be grandparents. However, despite how wonderful the situation initially seemed, a few months after Gohan's birth, things would change. Chi-Chi's personality would radically shift as she tried to prevent Goku from visiting his father as often to train with him. She would also start pressuring Gohan, who had barely started taking his first steps, to study so he could one day become a great scholar. This extreme behavior would deeply displease Gine, whose maternal instincts would drive her to intervene, lightening the workload for her poor grandson who was still in diapers, and for her son who wanted to continue spending time training with his father. This was the most natural way for Saiyan fathers and sons to bond, and she found it unfair and toxic that Chi-Chi would try to take that from them. Reluctantly, Chi-Chi would agree to give Goku a bit more freedom to continue seeing his father and ease the burden of study she placed on poor Gohan, who wasn't even a year old yet. Over the next 5 years since Goku's last victory over Piccolo, Grandpa Gohan, due to his old age, would eventually pass away from natural causes. He had lived much longer than was typical for a normal human, greatly saddening Goku and Gine, while Bardock would feel only mildly sorrowful over his passing, merely out of respect for the elderly Earthling who, so many years ago, had offered hospitality to aliens he didn't know, despite the terrifying reputation Saiyans had. Each would bid farewell to this great man in their own way, who had given them so much. 5 years after the last martial arts tournament, Goku would decide it was time to introduce his son to his friends, heading to Kame House so that little Gohan could meet his father's childhood friends. Far from what Goku could have imagined, that day of visit to his friends would not end at all as he would have imagined, because at that very moment in space, a space capsule like the one in which the Saiyan family had arrived on Earth so many years ago was rapidly approaching the same planet, and that was none other than Raditz, the lost son of Bardock and Gine, and brother of Kakarot, who was on his way to Earth to find his brother and ask for his help to eventually, if possible, defeat Frieza. After some years in which Goku's entire family enjoyed living in isolation during the early years of Gohan's upbringing, Chi-Chi finally agreed to allow Gohan to socialize with other humans outside his family. Goku took him to introduce him to his old friends at Master Roshi's Kame House. However, as his son and grandson left, Bardock couldn't shake the strange feeling that something was going to happen that day, that this wouldn't simply end with a visit to his son's friends. It was far from being a premonition, as some might think. Instead, Bardock's strange feeling was actually the tiny key of Raditz that he could very faintly perceive approaching Earth, eventually landing on the planet under similar circumstances to the original story, while Goku was on his way to Kame House with Gohan. The reunion among old friends and the introduction of Gohan would proceed much like in the original story until Raditz arrived on the island. He had ignored Piccolo, sensing that his power level was suspiciously close to his own. not wanting to take unnecessary risks as he had only come to the planet to find and retrieve his brother Kakarot. Upon his arrival, everyone was confused by the strange appearance of this newcomer, and Goku quickly noticed his tail, uncomfortably asking him if he was a Saiyan. Raditz, with a confident smile, confirmed that he was indeed a Saiyan, though he had found it strange that this man knew of his race without remembering his brother. When Goku heard Raditz say those words, he immediately realized who this person was. It was his long-lost brother, Raditz, the first son of Bardock and Gine. Goku, or rather Kakarot, recognized that now he did remember, though only vaguely, recalling that he had once been visited by a boy with long hair that reached down his back while he was still in his Saiyan incubation pod. It was undeniably surprising. Goku had thought Raditz had died with the destruction of Planet Vegeta. Raditz then explained everything that had actually happened, telling him that 2 other Saiyans had also survived. They needed more warriors to make it easier to conquer a planet, and that was why Raditz had come to Earth, to recruit his brother Kakarot into Vegeta's team, so they could participate in planetary conquest and massacres of the races inhabiting them, reselling those planets to the highest bidder. Goku, visibly disgusted, responded to Raditz by saying he would never do that. He completely refused to continue the cruel and barbaric behavior of their race and said he can never bring himself to commit the same atrocities their people had inflicted across the universe, until their eventual disappearance when Frieza destroyed Planet Vegeta. Raditz was shocked at that statement. How could it be that Frieza had destroyed Planet Vegeta? This was news to him. Goku was about to give Raditz more details to explain how he knew all of this, but then Bardock and Gine arrived, interrupting the conversation. Raditz stood there in stunned silence, completely overwhelmed by the sheer surprise of seeing his parents there, alive, along with Kakarot and his son. It was simply a surreal moment for the confused Saiyan. Quickly, Raditz's confidence, arrogance, and rude demeanor faded, as he felt a calming sensation in the presence of his mother. Gine couldn't help but embrace Raditz with all her strength after all these years of separation. Raditz stood still like a statue, still trying to process what was happening. Bardock approached his son, placing an arm on his shoulder, and told him that they had a lot to catch up on. But first, he needed to deactivate his scouter so Frieza wouldn't overhear their conversation. This moment turned into a heartfelt family reunion, with Raditz catching up on everything that had happened in his parents' lives, and Kakarot's as well. He also finally understood how Goku knew about Planet Vegeta's destruction by Frieza, becoming even more enraged at how Frieza had mistreated and humiliated them as his servants, along with Vegeta and Nappa, for years. Although, thinking back, Vegeta had suspected that it was Frieza who destroyed the planet, but they had never had concrete confirmation. Until now. After hearing all of this, Raditz also began to reveal the true reason why he had come to find his brother on Earth. It wasn't to recruit him for the conquest of a difficult planet. No, the real reason Prince Vegeta had sent him was to increase their team's strength in hopes of defeating Frieza. That was Vegeta's ultimate goal, his greatest obsession, to defeat Frieza. And although Frieza was far too powerful for any of them to take on, even if Kakarot joined them, which Raditz now found absurd, he had sensed Kakarot's power level on the way to Kame House, which was only around 500, a shockingly weak level, far lower than his own. Everyone chuckled at Raditz's naive comment, confusing him greatly. Bardock then told Kakarot to show his brother where he was mistaken, Goku powering up his ki to his maximum level, revealing a fighting power well above 2000, far surpassing Raditz and leaving him stunned, unable to comprehend such a drastic change in power. Bardock assured him that once learned, it was easy to control one's power level and sense others without needing a scouter, and he could teach Raditz the same technique, which he readily accepted. However, now that he had discovered that his parents were alive, Raditz still grappled with the reality that Bardock was the most powerful warrior of all, with a power level of 100,000. Bardock began to contemplate the plan he should adopt and whether it was reasonable to act now after so much time. After all, he also had a certain obsession with avenging himself and finishing off Frieza, an obsession that was somewhat like Prince Vegeta's. However, if even after all this time his power level was still below Captain Ginyu's, it wouldn't be worth even considering going out into space to confront Frieza and fighting him. It would simply be suicide. But then he remembered the training his son Kakarot underwent years ago with Kami, the god of Earth, and he questioned him again for more details about that training. Goku then recalled the interesting detail of the hyperbolic time chamber, though he cautioned his father that the conditions in that dimension were unsustainable even for a Saiyan. Although he had grown much stronger since then, Goku doubted that he could last more than a couple of weeks in the chamber, and this applied even to Bardock, with his far superior power level. Despite this, they thought it would be worthwhile to ask Kami what he thought about the situation. So, after Gohan was safely back at Mount Paosu with his mother and Gine was left to explain everything that had happened to Chi-Chi, Goku, Bardock, and Raditz set off for Kami's lookout. Kami was not pleased about having someone as vile-hearted as Raditz know the location of his palace, though he held back his complaints for now, not wanting to anger Bardock by insulting his son, even if those insults were entirely true and valid. They explained everything to Kami and asked if he had any effective training methods to prepare them for an eventual confrontation with Frieza. Kami confirmed that there were indeed other training methods more suited to their current power levels, and that this training he had in mind would eventually allow them to utilize the hyperbolic time chamber to its fullest potential. Kami then attempted to contact the beings of the other world, coordinating with King Yemma and King Kai to arrange for some warriors to receive special training under the North Kai. Although it was troublesome to receive living beings in the other world, after much discussion among the three beings, they finally agreed to allow Bardock and Goku to go to the other world to train with King Kai. However, Raditz, whom King Yemma had examined closely, was strictly forbidden from joining his father and brother. If they tried to bring him anyway, they would lose the opportunity to train with King Kai. This news shocked everyone, especially Raditz, who felt deeply insulted and humiliated and, once again, abandoned by his own family. A feeling that drove him nearly insane. Bardock tried to calm him, explaining that their paths had to be different, and that Raditz was simply not ready for it. Raditz had too many sins to atone for, having spent the past few decades conquering and massacring countless races with no pity or remorse. It was absurd for him to expect special treatment from the gods overnight, given the horrible acts he had committed without any empathy or regret. Raditz countered that this was extremely hypocritical since his father had also spent a large part of his life conquering and destroying planets, but Bardock shouted at his son, explaining that he had already paid for those mistakes. First by saving a Cerulean from annihilation like the rest of his race, and later by saving his family by bringing them to Earth and giving them a better life and opportunities. He also had indirectly contributed to Earth's protection through Kakarot's strength. Bardock argued that he had repaid all his debts for the crimes of his past and had lived so long on Earth that his Saiyan past no longer mattered. Raditz, however, was unwilling to accept this injustice from his perspective. Though he had never felt remorse for the races he annihilated, he was also forced to do so in Frieza's service, with no other choice, while his brother lived a carefree life like a pampered weakling. Raditz stormed out of Kami's lookout, cursing his father and brother for not standing up for him, frustrated by what he saw as betrayal and abandonment by his own family. Goku was about to go after Raditz, but Bardock stopped him, saying that Raditz needed to confront his own demons on his own, and that there was nothing they could do to change that. He suggested they hurry and proceed to the other world to train with King Kai, and Kakarot agreed to follow his father's advice. While Bardock and Goku were traveling to the other world to cross Snake Way, Raditz reached out to Vegeta and Nappa via his scouter, explaining everything that had happened. Though Vegeta couldn't care less about his family drama, he was intrigued and interested in Bardock's high power level. If Bardock was as powerful as Raditz claimed, it was important to convince him to return to the old ways of the Saiyans and help them defeat Frieza. Not only to kill him, but also to take control of his vast empire and rule the universe as the glorious Saiyan race once did. Although Raditz still doubted he could convince Bardock to act that way, Vegeta paid no mind, as if he would listen to the opinions of a low-class Saiyan like Raditz. So weak that even the rest of his low-class family was far more powerful than him. Vegeta and Nappa laughed mockingly as they prepared to head to Earth in about a year. Raditz, enraged and disgusted, crushed his scouter in his hands, feeling devastated by the contempt of even his comrades and family. Despite everything and feeling betrayed like a lost child, Raditz's first instinct was not to isolate himself, but rather to return to Mount Paosu, where his mother, Gine, was clinging to the childish hope of finding at least one person he could lean on during these difficult times when everyone seemed to abandon him. Raditz arrived at the house Bardock and Gine had built next to Grandpa Gohan's and Goku and Chi-Chi's, and began venting to Gine, cursing and complaining endlessly about his father and brother. Gine of course understood that Raditz was biased in his perspective of events and far from objective, but like a patient and caring mother, she endured her son's anger and complaints to let him release everything he was holding inside. She later re-explained everything Bardock had already told him, but in gentler and more digestible words, in a way only Gine could have. This frustrated Raditz, as he felt she didn't fully support him, though paradoxically he was grateful for the emotional support his mother offered. He finally managed to calm down a bit and accept that Kakarot and Bardock had gone to train in the other world without him. Still, he remained frustrated and had no idea where to start to train and become stronger on his own, as he had never trained a day in his life. What the Saiyan didn't know was that outside the cluster of homes that made up the Sun family, a Namekian was listening in on the entire conversation, learning everything about the Saiyans who would arrive in a year, and of course about Frieza. This Namekian decided that this was a unique opportunity to grow in power thanks to the brother of his greatest enemy, Son Goku. After spending hours venting and talking with his mother, Raditz left his parents' home unsure where to go next, thirsting for answers to his doubts and frustrations. While flying aimlessly, Piccolo appeared before him, and Raditz suddenly recalled who he was. He was the power level he had detected and ignored earlier that same day. Surprised to find that he too was a Namekian, like the god of Earth. Piccolo would be taken aback by that revelation, not fully understanding what Raditz meant by Namekian, yet intrigued by the information Raditz could offer him. After a few minutes of intense conversation, they would both realize they shared a common interest, to benefit from each other in order to gain power that could rival Goku, in Piccolo's case, and Kakarot in Raditz's case. Finally, the two would agree to train together in preparation for the arrival of the Saiyans and the eventual confrontation with Frieza. Bardock and Goku would begin their journey along Snake Way, but very quickly they would realize that if Bardock carried his son, they could reach King Kai's planet in just a few hours instead of several days, or even weeks. Thus, a very surreal situation would occur. Bardock would find himself carrying his fully grown son in his arms, which he found extremely embarrassing and humiliating. Meanwhile, Goku found it hilarious due to the absurdity of the situation, but he would quickly be silenced by his father, who scolded him for always acting like an idiot. It was even more unsettling for Bardock to see his son behave so childishly now that he was an adult. It was like seeing a twisted version of himself in a mirror acting like a clown. Bardock mentioned that if Goku knew how to stand his ground with his wife, he would have been able to continue training all these years, and they wouldn't find themselves in this ridiculous and embarrassing situation of a father carrying his son, who was also a father. Goku would feel bad about those harsh words from his father, although he didn't agree that life should be taken so seriously, having not hit his head in this storyline. At least he was able to understand his father's reasoning and the seriousness he carried with him. Besides, Goku suspected there was something else weighing on his father's mind. Perhaps frustration that, after all these years, he still wasn't strong enough to defeat Frieza. After all, until Raditz's arrival, it was impossible to know how strong Bardock had become. Even though they had learned long ago to sense Ki, it was something Bardock couldn't do when he confronted Frieza to defend Planet Vegeta. Therefore, discovering now with Raditz's scouter that his power level was still below Captain Ginyu's put him in a foul mood. After barely half a day of travel, father and son would arrive at King Kai's planet, with Bardock standing on the tiny world without issue, while Goku found himself momentarily crushed by the planet's gravity. It wasn't that he didn't have the power to endure it, but simply that he wasn't used to being subjected to 10 times Earth's gravity. Frankly, Bardock felt extremely embarrassed seeing his son's incapacity and unserious attitude, which made him sick. Eventually, a monkey would appear in front of them, confusing both father and son. Goku, thinking that the monkey in question was King Kai, began imitating its embarrassing monkey-like poses and sounds, prompting Bardock to give his son a tremendous smack on the head, asking if he had gone stupid or what. Obviously, that monkey wasn't King Kai. And as if to confirm his point, the real King Kai appeared in front of them and the monkey Bubbles, confirming that he was indeed King Kai. Bardock then took charge of the conversation, introducing himself and his son to the North Kai, explaining that they had come here to train with him to become much stronger. Thanks to this clarification of Bardock and his son Kakarot's, or Goku's, intentions, there would be no misunderstandings that they had come to learn jokes from King Kai. Thus, they would begin training with him immediately. Meanwhile, on Earth, Raditz and Piccolo would begin their mutually beneficial training, aiming to become much stronger. One trained to be strong enough to impose his will when he conquered Earth and killed Goku, and the other to prove to his family and companions that he wasn't a failure, and deserved to be treated with more respect and as an equal. However, during training breaks, Raditz would still return to his mother's home as he, unlike Piccolo, who only needed water, had to eat, and eat a lot. Eating his mother's cooking was too satisfying and pleasurable to resist, gradually softening him despite his complaints and harsh words. Over time, he would also interact with Chi-Chi and Gohan, his brother's wife and son. This would inevitably force Piccolo to interact with them more as well, with Raditz and Piccolo slowly starting to grow fond of little Gohan without initially realizing it, much to the delight of Gine and Chi-Chi, who saw that their strategy of bringing them closer to Gohan was softening the two of them just as they had planned. Time would pass, and the other human warriors would train with Kami just as in the original story, though this time starting that training slightly stronger than the original due to the enormous motivation they had from knowing such powerful beings from space like Bardock. Eventually, 11 months would pass as Vegeta and Nappa arrived 1 month before a full year had passed, landing in the middle of a city and causing unparalleled destruction, which was about to escalate even further. But then, Raditz and Piccolo would arrive first on the scene, stopping Nappa from completely destroying the city by suggesting they go to a place without civilians and cities. The Saiyans would follow them, with the humans arriving shortly afterward. Piccolo would ask why they were about to destroy the city, thinking they had come not to fight, but to see how strong Goku and his father Bardock were. Vegeta and Nappa would respond with complete lack of empathy, saying they simply did it because it was fun to massacre people. The other humans were disgusted by this cruel behavior, while Raditz himself felt uncomfortable witnessing these interactions, knowing that not too long ago, he would have done the same. Now, however, he began to feel guilty for it after spending all these months on Earth, living with his mother and getting to know his nephew Gohan. Vegeta and Nappa, however, were puzzled, asking where Bardock and Kakarot were. And as if to answer that question, father and son would arrive moments later at the place where everyone was gathered, with Goku apologizing for being a bit late as they'd forgotten that returning to Earth wouldn't be instantaneous. But with the enormous speed they now possessed, it was no real problem. Vegeta would finally start getting excited at the prospect of meeting the Saiyan with such high power, as was the case with Bardock. However, Bardock wasn't as enthusiastic and would tell him honestly that he found it pathetic that his pride wouldn't accept that someone was more powerful than them. He also thought it was stupid to draw Frieza's attention by coming to Earth this way, since if they weren't powerful enough to defeat him, Vegeta and Nappa would also end up dead. Vegeta tried to keep a cool head despite the comment that hurt his pride, still knowing they needed to convince Bardock to join their side. For once, he attempted to feed Bardock's ego by saying that he simply wanted to verify the power of a low-class Saiyan who had become worthy of the strength of an elite Saiyan like himself. That was why he insisted on fighting him. At least in a friendly way, Vegeta said, grinding his teeth furiously. Bardock would respond to Vegeta's insistence by telling him that if he wanted to fight him, he'd have to beat his son Kakarot first. Vegeta was greatly irritated by this insult. After all, Bardock was the only anomaly among the low class. His son was a weakling like Raditz, but then Vegeta's insults were cut off by Nappa's shout of amazement. Scanning everyone's power levels, he saw that, for starters, both the Namekian and Raditz had a power level of 7,000, while Kakarot's was at 10,000, a fact that greatly shocked Vegeta. More about Raditz than Kakarot. It was unthinkable that he could have become so powerful in less than a year. He was certain that before this, Kakarot hadn't even reached Nappa's level. Still, Vegeta continued to insist that Kakarot's power, while impressive for a low-class Saiyan, was nowhere near his own, and even less so Bardock's. Goku then, with a slight smile on one side of his face, would tell Vegeta that it was true, he hadn't surpassed his father yet. However, he was now more than enough to defeat him and his companion Nappa if they wished, raising his resting key to its maximum, showing an impressive 100,000 units of power. Ironically, Goku had reached the same power level during that year of training as his father had when he started that same training. To speed things up and prove his point to Vegeta, Bardock would tell the prince not to bother creating an artificial moon and wasting his ki. He would do it for them, creating the same artificial moon for Vegeta and Nappa to transform into Oozaru. Bardock, Goku, and Raditz took extreme care not to look at the moon, averting their gaze so that only Vegeta and Nappa would transform. Once they had transformed, Bardock deactivated the artificial moon so they could look around without any problems. Bardock told them that the effects of the Blitz waves from that artificial moon would only last a few minutes, so they'd better get to it and fight his son Kakarot if that's what they wanted. Goku would stand in front of the giant apes that Vegeta and Nappa had become, with Vegeta mocking Bardock, calling him stupid as his son couldn't match his power as an Abzaru, let alone if Nappa joined in. Besides, he hadn't wasted any energy creating an artificial moon, but Goku would silence them immediately, activating a Kaioken times 5 and beginning to fly around Vegeta and Nappa's gigantic bodies at an absurd speed, easily hitting them and severely injuring them, taking advantage of their huge size. Within seconds, Vegeta and Nappa were defeated and unconscious from Goku's brutal blows, as he descended again in front of his father and friends, exclaiming that it was too easy. Everyone else, especially Raditz and Piccolo, looked on in amazement and terror at such power, unable to believe that Goku had become so strong in such a short time. Neither could they imagine how powerful Bardock was if he was indeed still the strongest of the two. Raditz regretted seeing that his plan to impress his father and earn his respect had failed. Despite surpassing Nappa, he was still a weakling. A few minutes later, the temporary effects of the artificial moon would fade, and Vegeta and Nappa would return to their humanoid forms, waking up shortly after from the massive beating Goku had given them. Vegeta would find himself deeply wounded in his pride. A low-class Saiyan becoming so immensely superior to him was hard enough to swallow, but two of them? That was the last straw. Still, he pushed forward, insisting on the obvious. Wasn't it clear, he would ask? They were already far stronger than Frieza. Surely they could defeat him. Also, didn't Bardock want to avenge his race, Planet Vegeta, his Saiyan legacy? Bardock would scoff at these attempts to manipulate him into doing what Vegeta wanted, but it was true. He wanted revenge, and he would love to kill Frieza, not for his race or Planet Vegeta, but for his personal pride and family honor. After all, though he never said it out loud for fear of sounding as soft as Gine, he did feel guilty for abandoning Raditz to Frieza's hands. He was furious at the thought that his son had spent his entire life serving that monster. That was why he wanted to revenge, because unlike what Raditz thought, his father did care about his firstborn son. Bardock would finally agree, agreeing to confront Frieza, but on the condition that they confront him before he came to Earth. He refused to risk losing a second home like Earth had become for his family. He also demanded, for the sake of caution and for the good of Vegeta and Nappa themselves, that they continue training a little more, at least a few more months, to become as powerful as possible. Vegeta and Nappa agreed. After all, the idea of training with a Saiyan so powerful to grow stronger themselves was also very appealing. And so, everyone would resume their training, especially the Saiyans and Piccolo. The latter didn't want to fall behind in power, and was also very curious about the fact that apparently he and Kami were aliens called Namekians. He would ask Vegeta and Nappa for more information about this, building on what Raditz had told him over the past year. However, Kami would refuse to allow the Saiyans to enter his temple for the time being, sensing a darkness and malice even more present in them than in Raditz. Since they weren't Bardock's children, he could be more open about his opinion of those two compared to Raditz the previous year. Although he had to admit Raditz had changed quite a lot, as had Piccolo. The two of them finding redemption together was quite surprising, likely thanks to the important role Gohan now played in both their lives. Goku, Bardock, Raditz, and Piccolo would find themselves training intensely at Kami's lookout. Bardock, preparing for the next challenge to ensure his strength against Frieza, set his sights on the hyperbolic time chamber. After reaching a power level of 2 million through training with King Kai, Bardock felt ready to attempt training in the chamber and survive its extreme environment. Goku, though weaker, insisted on joining him. Their training was grueling, with each Saiyan pushing their limits to survive the hostile dimension of the chamber. After an entire year, they emerged more powerful than ever. Ironically, during this time, Goku had finally reached his father's level, both now standing equal at 6 million in power. While it didn't seem like a huge increase, the focus was more on Goku's growth, with Bardock hoping that his son would take on the role of family protector, eventually surpassing him. However, Bardock noticed that Raditz seemed disappointed, once again feeling left out in favor of his younger brother. Determined to mend their relationship, Bardock suggested they train together in the chamber, assuring Raditz he would help him reach Goku's level. Kami questioned the decision, noting the chamber's difficulty and Raditz's current power, but Bardock reassured him. He wasn't entering the chamber a second time to grow stronger himself, but to help his eldest son catch up. Bringing several Senzu beans for emergencies, Bardock entered the chamber with Raditz. After their second year of intense training, Bardock's power level remained mostly unchanged, but Raditz had achieved a significant increase, reaching 3 million. Although still below his father and brother, the overwhelming gap between them had narrowed. This progress lifted Raditz's spirits, especially knowing his father was proud of his rapid growth. Kami questioned if using both years in the chamber was wise, as they could no longer access it, but Bardock stood firm. His sons were the future protectors of their family and Earth. After Frieza's defeat, he could finally rest knowing his legacy was safe. Bardock recognized his own limits, while Raditz and Goku, being younger, had much more potential left to fulfill. Meanwhile, Vegeta and Nappa, who had started learning to sense ki without scouters, were shaken by the power radiating from Bardock's family. Barred from Kami's lookout, they felt frustrated at missing out on the rapid growth that was happening. Raditz wasted no time in descending from the lookout to taunt Vegeta and Nappa, enjoying the sight of Vegeta's shattered pride, though he refrained from challenging them directly. He mentioned that they had more pressing matters, namely their mission of vengeance against Frieza, and asked Piccolo to help Vegeta and Nappa increase their power. In the original story, Piccolo's training with King Kai in the afterlife drastically raised his power to rival or even surpass Nails. Here, Piccolo had grown significantly stronger, now on par with Vegeta. Training together allowed all of them to quickly advance, and with a supply of Senzu beans, they maximized the Saiyan Zenkai boosts. Meanwhile, Bulma and her father were building a massive spaceship based on Saiyan pod designs. In 1 week, the team would depart for Frieza's last known location. After a week of grueling training and Zenkai boosts, Vegeta and Nappa had dramatically increased their powers. Not to the level of Bardock's family, but sufficient to avoid being a liability in their upcoming mission. Finally, they were ready for their journey aboard the spaceship built by Bulma and her father. Vegeta would obviously be the more powerful of the two, with a power level of 2 million, while Nappa was just behind them with a power level of only 1 million. However, Piccolo would be somewhere between the two in terms of power, boasting a power level of 1.5 million. To keep up, he would head up to Kami's temple every night while the Saiyans slept, training in the hyperbolic time chamber. He distributed a year's worth of training throughout the week to make it bearable while still allowing him to stay on par with the Saiyans. At Kami's request, though, he kept this a secret from Vegeta and Nappa, as the Earth's gods still did not consider them worthy of such an effective training method that could potentially make them more powerful than the rest. In any case, the Saiyans, along with Piccolo, would head into space, setting the coordinates that Vegeta and Nappa had given them for locating Frieza. But unfortunately for them, when they arrived a few days later on Frieza's planet number 69, Frieza was already receiving a guest, his father, King Cold, who was almost as strong as Frieza himself. This deeply worried them all, although it was also the perfect opportunity to finish off both Frieza and King Cold. With their approach already underway, it was too late to turn back and flee. Soon, a massive army of soldiers arrived at the ship, preparing to attack the intruders and receiving a tremendous shock when they realized most of them were Saiyans, including Vegeta, Nappa, and Raditz. The Saiyans were having the time of their lives, massacring those soldiers, who were now immensely outclassed, enjoying every moment, especially when they managed to defeat Dodoria and Zarbon as well. Hearing and feeling the tremors across the planet from all the ruckus outside their quarters, Frieza and Cold stepped out to see what was going on. There, Frieza came face to face with Bardock. It took the Emperor a moment to remember him, but then he recalled that Bardock was the Saiyan who had resisted him and tried to oppose the destruction of Planet Vegeta. Frieza acknowledged that Bardock had been far more resilient and resistant to death than he initially thought, but he wasn't about to make the same mistake of letting him live again. Bardock responded by telling Frieza that he would never be able to correct his mistake and that the consequences had already come to bear. He and his family were here to kill both Frieza and his father, ending their empire and reign of terror, and avenging the trauma they caused to his people and family. Frieza and Cold mocked Bardock, challenging him to even attempt to land a blow on them. Bardock quickly accepted the challenge, landing a massive punch on Frieza and Cold that sent them flying, leaving them shocked and horrified by how powerful Bardock had become. Frieza rose from the huge crater he and his father had created, glaring at Bardock and coordinating with Cold to attack him again, this time with their guard up. However, Goku stopped Cold, telling him that the fight between his father and Frieza was personal and that he would not allow them to cheat by fighting 2 against 1. Goku then confronted Cold himself. Quickly, both emperors realized that if they wanted to survive, they needed to transform into their final forms. Both did so, activating half of their power, with Cold being slightly weaker than Frieza, but still an immensely terrifying force. Cold's half power stood at 50 million, while Frieza's was 60 million. Their battles continued, with Bardock and Goku using their Kaioken technique boosted up to 10 times. The fights were intense and well matched, though Goku held a slight advantage over Cold until the latter activated 100% of his power. Unlike his son, he could reach his maximum power much more quickly, using the surprise effect of his increased strength to push Goku far back and knock him out with a single blow. This allowed him to help his son, giving Frieza enough time to reach 100% of his own power. After a few seconds, Frieza finally succeeded, resuming his battle with Bardock just as Goku returned to the battlefield to continue his fight with Cold, increasing his Kaioken to 15 times and briefly using a Kaioken of 20 times to conserve energy. Bardock, however, had another trick up his sleeve. During his second year in the hyperbolic time chamber with Raditz, he hadn't focused on raw power. Instead, he had trained to improve his physical endurance and raise the Kaioken level he could sustain for prolonged periods. Now, Bardock activated a steady Kaioken of 20 times. Though it was more stable than Goku's previous attempt at a Kaioken of 20 times, it was still extremely exhausting and dangerous for his body, clearly unsustainable at that level for long. For now though, Bardock and Frieza stood toe-to-toe, each at a power level of 120 million, delivering a battle of unprecedented scale that shook the entire planet. Meanwhile, the combination of their clash with Goku and Cold's fight made the ground tremble all around them. Whereas Goku had previously had the upper hand, the situation had now reversed, with Goku increasingly feeling the strain of such a high Kaioken. In contrast, Cold, being older, more experienced, and ironically weaker than his son, could manage his full power more efficiently. While still exhausting, it wasn't as intense as when his son used it. Nonetheless, Cold was furious with his son. Frieza was supposed to have finished off all the Saiyans. Due to his arrogance and carelessness, however, there were now two Saiyans capable of rivaling them. The situation was extremely dangerous for both, and they needed to win at any cost to establish themselves as the most powerful beings in the universe. Excluding, of course, Majin Buu and Beerus, Cold thought. Cold was much more cunning and deceitful than his son, though equally stubborn and dishonorable. Frieza still had a certain warrior's pride that limited how ruthlessly he fought. Cold, on the other hand, would not hesitate for even a second to deceive and seize any opportunity to kill his opponents, as he demonstrated in the original story when he asked to borrow future Trunks' sword. Capitalizing on Goku's naive and carefree nature, Cold exploited a momentary lapse in Goku's guard as he observed his father's fight with Frieza, shooting a powerful laser beam through Goku's heart, defeating him instantly and ending the battle, much to the horror of Raditz and Bardock. Bardock would scream and curse over that fact, ready to go against Cold, but Frieza would stop him, taking advantage of this distraction to land some solid, equally fatal blows on Bardock, finally regaining the advantage in this closely matched fight. Cold would join him to finish off those two Saiyans who were powerful enough to put them in a tight spot. Raditz would approach his brother's body, realizing that it would be useless to give him a Senzu Bean as sadly he was already gone. He cursed Frieza and Cold for causing yet another loss among the Saiyan race. Bardock would realize that he could no longer feel Kakarot's ki, and upon seeing Raditz lamenting in front of Kakarot's lifeless body from afar, he would finally understand what had happened, unable to believe that he had failed his son, that he hadn't been able to protect him. After everything they had done to save him from the terrible fate of Planet Vegeta, he had died in the end. Then, as he continued to take a beating from Frieza and Cold, Bardock would explode in a fit of rage and anguish over the overwhelming feelings of losing his son, and he would finally transform into the legendary Super Saiyan they so desperately needed to defeat Frieza and Cold once and for all. The powerful aura of Bardock would be so immense and overwhelming that Frieza and King Cold couldn't even approach the Saiyan. After finishing his power surge scream, Bardock would reveal himself as the legendary Super Saiyan. This would significantly intimidate Frieza and Cold, but they were still confident that together they could defeat him. However, they would quickly be faced with reality. Bardock would charge at them like a furious beast with an enormous power level of 300 million units, far surpassing the combined power of Cold and Frieza. Additionally, the two of them were already weakened and tired from previous battles where they had used their muscular forms to the maximum, making it much easier for Bardock to brutally crush them both. Due to the intense anger burning within him, his judgment was clouded, preventing him from coordinating his attacks and fighting more efficiently. He was rougher and more predictable in his movements, but the difference in strength and speed was so vast that it no longer mattered. Very quickly, Bardock would destroy the universe's tyrannical emperors with a powerful key attack, finally achieving his revenge on Frieza and Cold and everything these two demons represented, ending the cycle that had begun when Bardock survived Frieza's attack that destroyed Planet Vegeta. After all of that, Bardock would de-transform, extremely exhausted and with his body in great pain from his injuries and the previous strain of transforming into a Super Saiyan with the Kaioken raised to such a high level. Without a doubt, the other Saiyans were impressed by what had happened, unable to believe that Bardock was, in the end, the legendary Super Saiyan. Raditz couldn't help but proudly exclaim how proud he was of his father and to be part of his family and lineage, finally showing Vegeta that it didn't matter if one was low class. For a Saiyan, nothing was impossible in terms of power, regardless of their class. This was a fact that, much to Vegeta's disgust, he now had to acknowledge. They had, however, a notable loss in this battle. The death of Kakarot deeply affected Raditz as well as Bardock, but it was assumed that this was a necessary sacrifice for Bardock to awaken the legendary power of the Saiyan race. After catching his breath from the intense battle, Bardock would pick up his son's body and, without further words, tell everyone to return to Earth, unless they wanted to stay behind. He didn't really care, referring to Vegeta and Nappa. But to his surprise, the Saiyans decided to follow Bardock, with the veteran Saiyan assuming that it was likely because of his new Super Saiyan power that they too would surely want to achieve. Although at that moment, Bardock doubted if he could reach that power again, wondering if he could only transform in the future through such a traumatic and infuriating event like witnessing the death of one of his sons. If that were the case, the Super Saiyan was a useless transformation, although he wouldn't know that for now. He thought that for now they simply needed to focus on returning to Earth, gathering the Dragon Balls, and resurrecting his son Kakarot. Eventually, after a few days of traveling, they would return to Earth, with everyone shocked and deeply saddened to see that Goku had died, especially Chi-Chi, Gohan, and Gine. But Bardock would assure them not to worry, as they were going to bring him back with the Dragon Balls. He asked Bulma for the Dragon Radar, rushing as much as he could to gather them all and revive his son as soon as possible. While this was happening, the other Saiyans told everyone what had happened, including Bardock's incredible transformation into a Super Saiyan upon witnessing his son's death. Everyone was shocked by this fact, especially Gine, but at the same time, she felt proud. Her husband, the man she loved, was the legendary Super Saiyan. It was something she admired and was proud to be a part of the life of such a formidable warrior. After several hours of traveling across the planet, Bardock would finally gather all the Dragon Balls. And immediately, he would waste no time summoning Shenron, asking him to resurrect his son Kakarot. The dragon granted the wish without any problem, with the Saiyan's body coming back to life fully revitalized, healed of all wounds, and free from the slight decomposition that had started affecting his corpse during the days traveling back to Earth through space. Everyone rejoiced at reuniting with Goku, and he likewise was happy to see everyone. He shared that King Kai had shown him Bardock's battle against Frieza and Cold, and he was amazed by that power. The Super Saiyan was incredible, and he couldn't wait to try that power for himself. Goku took it all lightly, laughing as if it were nothing, which enraged Bardock. He punched his newly revived son hard in the face, knocking him to the ground, and yelled at him for taking things so lightly. He had died because of a foolish distraction, as his innocence allowed Cold to deceive him, despite Bardock and the other Saiyans warning him that Cold and Frieza were vicious individuals willing to fight dirty to win, and despite that, Kakarot had let his guard down. Goku, hurt by the blow his father had given him, apologized for being careless as he got up from the ground and promised he would try not to let it happen again in the future, though Bardock had his doubts about it. Despite this tense scene between father and son, they all ended up celebrating the victory over Frieza and his father, and afterward, each of them returned to their homes, resuming their normal lives. Time passed, and life went on as usual. Over the months, Bardock finally managed to transform into a Super Saiyan at will, and around the same time, Goku also achieved the same form, allowing them both to push their power to new heights by training with each other, evenly matched in terms of strength. Meanwhile, Raditz would take a few more months to transform, but he eventually achieved it, making Vegeta curse his fate and everything he was. as he still couldn't transform into a Super Saiyan, with even Nappa beginning to think that perhaps Vegeta was taking it too personally, and that if he kept this up, he would go completely crazy and lose his mind. Now, with Bardock's family, all adults, being powerful Super Saiyans, they continued training together to become as strong as possible. But one day, during their training on Mount Paozu, they were interrupted by an astonishing figure that shocked everyone. At first, they couldn't believe it, thinking perhaps it was some kind of imposter. But the more they looked at him closely, the harder it was to deny the truth. This strange individual who had appeared was none other than Bardock himself, but a much older Bardock, so old that he was beginning to show signs of accelerated aging, as was common among Saiyans over 80 years old. Bardock was evidently the most surprised there, still struggling to understand how this could be possible. Gine, though intimidated, would slowly approach the older Bardock until she stood in front of him. Looking him directly in the eyes and gently touching his face, now with a scruffy beard, she would quickly realize and understand the situation. He was Bardock. He was the real Bardock, but from another time, without a doubt, though she still couldn't comprehend how that was possible. The old Bardock would confirm Gine's words, finally explaining everything. He was Bardock, the same Bardock standing before them, but much older, from about 20 years into the future. He explained to them that in about 2 years, Kakarot would die from heart disease, and 1 year after that, androids would appear, created by Dr. Gero. These androids were extremely powerful and cruel, killing millions of people and destroying thousands of cities across the planet. All the warriors had tried to stop them, but without success, having been completely taken by surprise. They were unable to regroup and devise a plan to work together and defeat the androids as a team. The androids knew that if all the warriors had united to fight them at once, they would have stood no chance. So, they made sure to attack each warrior individually with the intention of killing them as quickly as possible, and thus, the Earth Warriors, Piccolo, Nappa, and even Raditz died. Gohan, having lost his father some time before, and now his uncle Raditz, with whom he had developed a close bond over the years, would explode in a surge of energy, briefly making him very powerful. But in this story, since he had never trained or developed his potential, he was unable to do anything against the androids, much less transform into a Super Saiyan, dying at the hands of the androids after that brief burst of rage. Bardock barely survived, becoming the last warrior capable of fighting, along with another who he would not mention at this time to avoid altering the future too much. Given the dire situation they found themselves in, Gine would decide to muster the courage to train as well to become the powerful warrior. The death of her son, first from disease, and then the death of her other son and her grandson at the hands of these androids, had completely broken her morally, filling her with immense rage that finally gave her the warrior's will needed to train and fight to support Bardock's resistance efforts. Alone, he stood no chance against the androids. Unfortunately, even with all the effort in the world, Gine couldn't reach the same level that Bardock had achieved after so many decades without training. With more limited resources and no Senzu beans, it was even harder for her to reach this level and thus help him in the fight against the androids. Additionally, as the years continued to pass, there was another problem that limited them greatly in terms of power growth. Their Saiyan biology was reaching its limit in terms of prolonged youth. They were nearing 80 years old, and as they approached that age, their respective growth in power became nearly impossible. Bardock had become very skilled with the Super Saiyan form, mastering it to the point of reaching the 4th grade. Eventually, after much effort and strain, Gine also achieved the Super Saiyan form, though she had very poor control over the transformation and was still significantly weaker than Bardock. With the end of their Saiyan youth approaching, it became even more impossible for her to continue growing stronger as a warrior. And the same applied to Bardock. They were becoming less powerful each time, with the Zenkais they obtained from numerous defeats at the hands of the androids being increasingly inferior to the previous ones, even with the assistance and help of another warrior, whose name Bardock still refrained from mentioning for fear of altering the future too much. One day, the androids decided to attack West City, coming dangerously close to what remained of Capsule Corporation's building, where Bulma still lived and worked tirelessly to assist humanity with a project she'd been working on for a long time. Bulma's life was irreplaceable due to the value of her intelligence and what she could contribute. Bardock, Gine, and the young warrior had no choice but to go defend the city from the androids and their insatiable thirst for blood and destruction. Now almost elderly, the couple gave everything they had to defend themselves from these horrible machines. However, with age also came faster body fatigue, making it harder for them to endure prolonged battles. Facing androids with infinite energy made it even worse. During this fight, Gine would die at the hands of the androids, finally providing the catalyst Bardock needed to summon the little remaining youth in his body and transforming to a higher level of Super Saiyan, a form he called Super Saiyan 2. With that power and rage, he managed to give the androids an intense battle, severely injuring them and even killing one of them, Android 18. Seeing his sister die terrified Android 17, who cowardly fled to save his own life. Bardock attempted to pursue him to finish off that damned android as well, but his body had reached its absolute limit. He collapsed under the weight of his own exhausted body, worn out by decades and decades of unending stress and battles. Upon returning to his base form, Bardock found himself transformed into an old man, his hair completely white, with numerous wrinkles that distorted his face. He cursed and yelled at the universe for the tragedy, for all that he had lost, and for no longer being able to keep fighting due to his age. 3 years after that terrible day, Bulma finally completed the time machine she had been building and entrusted Bardock, who now appeared completely old and worn out, with the mission of returning to the past to warn his past versions about the danger of the androids, and thus prevent that horrible future. She also gave him medicine for Kakarot's heart virus, hoping it would save his life and alter all their destinies if he survived to face the androids that would appear 3 years later. The old Bardock would have loved to show them Super Saiyan 2, but he was certain that if he attempted to transform even into ordinary Super Saiyan one more time, his body would not withstand it and he would die instantly from a heart attack due to the immense strain on his aging body. Nonetheless, he described in extreme detail the sensation he felt upon achieving that form, in addition to sharing with his family in the past all the information, advice, and knowledge he had on how to perfectly control Super Saiyan without the slightest key drain. It was a necessary process to achieve the superior form known as Super Saiyan 2. With all this information, he hoped that now his past versions would have what it took to achieve Super Saiyan 2, confident that if his younger self and his 2 sons obtained that transformation, they could defeat the androids without any problems. With nothing more to say, he departed, promising to return to the past in 3 years with the other young warrior he had mentioned, but without revealing his name, only to check if everything had gone well and if they had successfully changed the future. This objective had obsessed Bardock all his life, and now he hoped his past version would succeed. Embracing his 2 sons one last time, he then hugged Gine with all his heart and sorrow, nearly shedding a tear due to the pain of seeing her young and beautiful once again. This act made the young Bardock uncomfortable, but with a mere look, they both silently said goodbye, understanding each other as if they could communicate telepathically. The old Bardock then returned to the future, hoping his journey would bring about a positive change for what was to happen 3 years from now. And so, Bardock's family went to inform the other warrior friends of the warning they had received from future Bardock, putting everyone on alert for the terrible future awaiting them. They began training immediately to prepare for what would come 3 years later. Another very important matter was the tragic fate of Gohan. Since he hadn't previously trained in his life or developed his potential, he hadn't been powerful enough to survive against the androids. However, according to future Bardock, if this Gohan was already so powerful without having trained at all, then with proper training he could be an essential key to victory in this new future they were about to shape. After much discussion and dispute with Chi-Chi, Bardock, Gine, Kakarot, and Raditz convinced her to let Gohan train. Though for her, the knowledge that her son could die if he didn't wasn't enough of a reason. Reluctantly, she agreed, but only on the condition that after these 3 years and the android ordeal, Gohan would return to his studies and never train again. To them, this condition seemed absurd, with Bardock barely holding back the urge to slap that woman. He and Chi-Chi never got along, and her foolish reaction to her son's future death was a reminder of that. In the end, though, Gohan could begin training with his family for his first time in his life. Fortunately, as he was now a bit older and understood the situation better than he had at just 4 years old, he was more receptive to training with his family. Moreover, being surrounded by strong-willed and tough individuals like Bardock and now Raditz helped him build confidence and become less timid. Surprisingly, while Gohan sometimes complained like a spoiled weakling, at other times he demonstrated adaptability and courage, no matter what his family put him through in training. Gine also started training to support her grandson, with whom she had a very close relationship, but also to prevent the terrible future that awaited him, ensuring her husband Bardock wouldn't suffer from losing him as he did in the future. Additionally, still young enough to develop her potential and in better conditions than in the future, she would gain a significant advantage over her future self by taking advantage of these 3 years of training they had before the arrival of the androids. Thanks to all that intense preparation for the worst possible scenario, combined with the benefits of training with multiple Saiyans, as the more Saiyans they had as training partners, the faster they grew in power. Bardock from the future had also explained to them how to perfectly control the Super Saiyan form up to the 4th grade. Bardock, Goku, and Raditz constantly remained in their Super Saiyan forms for much of those 3 years of training. It wasn't as efficient as training in the hyperbolic time chamber, but they had much more time than just 1 year to achieve similar results, and being in greater numbers helped push each other to new limits. Over those 3 years, Gine and Gohan would also reach the Super Saiyan form and quickly took on the same habit as the rest of their family, maintaining the transformation constantly to get used to it. Though they wouldn't become as powerful as the others, they would at least have the same degree of control over the transformation. Without a doubt, Chi-Chi's life with her family had become a real nightmare for her. She now had to live day in and day out with an entire family of delinquents, she thought ignorantly. During this time, Vegeta did everything possible to become more powerful, watching Bardock's family and Raditz surpass him tremendously. No matter how much power or transformations he obtained, even when he eventually achieved Super Saiyan, it was never enough. It would never be enough. This drove him into deep anger and constant frustration. At times, Nappa even thought Vegeta might have caused some Earth disease that dogs experienced, called rabies. But no, Vegeta was literally foaming and smoking from his mouth due to his fury. Not even his relationship with Bulma and the birth of his son Trunks was enough to calm him down and make him think about something else. One day, Piccolo, trying to understand Vegeta's profound distress, finally told him about the hyperbolic time chamber. After much persuasion, he managed to convince Kami to allow them to ascend to his lookout. Kami reluctantly agreed, knowing that many powerful beings on Earth could defeat Vegeta if he acted maliciously. Vegeta cursed everyone for not telling him about the chamber earlier, but at the same time, he felt an enormous sense of excitement. He had finally discovered Bardock's and his family's secret. Of course, it was obvious that they were not stronger than him because he was a loser or a failure. No, of course not. It was because they cheated, because they used the hyperbolic time chamber. If he used that chamber to train for the 2 years he was allowed, he would once again become the strongest Saiyan of them all, as was normal and the natural order of things as the superior prince of the Saiyan race. Or at least that's what his crazy egocentric mind thought. Even forcing Nappa to go with him as his personal punching bag wouldn't be enough. Yes, Vegeta had become much stronger, vastly stronger than before, and so had Nappa, but he was still not stronger than Bardock, Raditz, or Kakarot. He had achieved a superior level of Super Saiyan, the 2nd grade he called his Super Vegeta form, but it was still not enough. He could feel it from the lookout after leaving the chamber. He was still weaker. This realization caused him to collapse on his knees, throwing a tantrum like a child, with Nappa taking him back to Bulma before he, Kami, and Mr. Popo died of embarrassment, while Piccolo simply facepalmed at the ridiculousness of the situation. Vegeta simply didn't understand the true reason behind Bardock's family's success, nor could he understand the method they used to control Super Saiyan at such a perfect and harmonious level. His heart remained too volatile and violent to even consider the possibility that, to become stronger, he simply needed to relax, something utterly impossible for him to imagine or accept for the moment. But none of that mattered. In the end, all the warriors were monstrously more powerful than in the original story. This time, Bardock ensured a few days later when he noticed his son breathing slightly heavier than usual and showing less endurance than usual in training, that he took the medicine for his heart disease, despite Goku's uncertainty about needing it, with Bardock cursing that he had such a powerful son, but also so weak-minded to not use a stronger word. And so, the time finally arrived, after 3 years, to confront the androids who were to appear that very day. All the warriors headed to the location where future Bardock had told them the androids would appear. They were surprised to learn that Bulma had had a child with Vegeta, with Bardock's family finally understanding who that mysterious young warrior from the future was who helped defend Earth alongside his future self. Although, for the moment, they chose not to mention anything about it, focusing instead on the pressing issue of the android. Yajirobe came to deliver the Senzu beans at Master Korin's request, and as he flew back to Korin Tower in his vehicle, he was suddenly hit by an energy blast that blew his vehicle into pieces. Fortunately, he survived the explosion, as despite being lazy and not training for years, he was still quite strong and resilient for a normal human. Bardock and the others were shocked to realize they couldn't sense the android's ki, so while Gohan went to rescue Yajirobe from drowning in the ocean where he had fallen, the other warriors spread out across the city to find the androids before they could cause more collateral damage or even more victims. Eventually, Yamcha encountered androids 20 and 19, getting badly injured by these androids. Upon sensing his ki drop, the others arrived to help him and pull him out of trouble, with Krillin taking him to Bulma to get a Senzu beam. The others forced the androids to move to another deserted island where there would be fewer civilians who could fall victim to their fights. However, while flying, Bardock couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that things weren't happening as they were supposed to. His future self hadn't given them an exact description of what the androids looked like, but by the way he spoke about them, Bardock was almost certain that the androids his future self had fought weren't simply an old man and a fat clown. But one thing was sure, these were androids, and whether or not they were the same as the ones from the future, they needed to be eliminated. Upon arriving at the place where they would fight, Bardock and Piccolo first attempted to gather more information from the androids and understand more about their intentions. Android 20 spoke in a strange way, as if it were personal, almost as if he himself were Dr. Gero. He denied this, however, and left Android 19 to fight one of them. Goku wanted to fight first, but Raditz shoved him aside, expressing his strong desire to fight before anyone else. This annoyed Goku a bit, but he accepted, thinking he would at least have the chance to fight the other android. At this point, it wasn't even necessary to show the Super Saiyan form to the androids. Raditz fought in his base form, as he had become tremendously powerful after those 3 years of training and mastering the transformation in its 4th grade, significantly increasing his base state. The battle would have a very similar outcome to the one in the original story with Vegeta. Raditz ultimately destroyed the android completely, blowing his body apart with a powerful attack that left only the head barely intact. Android 20, terrified by this absurd display of power, and recalling that, according to the data, Raditz was supposedly the weakest of them all, attempted to escape and return to his lab. But then, in the distance, they heard a voice that grew louder and louder, shouting, "He's mine!" repeatedly. Eventually, arriving at full speed into the combat zone, Vegeta, transformed into a Grade 2 Super Saiyan, delivered a single kick that decapitated Dr. Gero. This individual was none other than Vegeta, groaning with satisfaction at finally defeating an enemy. He grabbed the remaining parts of Gero's body and disintegrated them completely. Shortly after, Nappa arrived at the battle zone, apologizing to everyone for their delay, as Vegeta insisted on training until the last possible minute to be as strong as he could be. Everyone found this extreme and pathetic on Vegeta's part, but after this anticlimactic moment, Bardock couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. He refused to believe that this was all, that his future self would have had trouble against such pathetic, weak androids. It was simply impossible. And indeed, seconds later, his future self arrived at the battlefield, this time accompanied by a young warrior, future Trunks. Bardock and Trunks, both surprised and confused, observed the remnants of androids 20 and 19. In an alarming and worried tone, they informed everyone that these were not the androids they had fought in the future. Present Bardock put his hand to his face, knowing that it was too easy to be true. It was impossible for that to be all, but now the question remained: where were the real androids? After confirming with the future Bardock that the androids they fought weren't the ones from the future with whom the elder Bardock had battled, everyone began to wonder where on Earth those androids were. Meanwhile, Vegeta was cursing everyone and everything because no one was paying attention to his 2nd grade Super Saiyan power. Eventually, Bulma arrived at the area where all the warriors were. Upon examining the remains of the destroyed androids, she confirmed, as Piccolo had theorized, that at least one of them was none other than Dr. Gero himself. Bulma then pointed out the location of Dr. Gero's not-so-secret laboratory. The two Bardocks cursed both present and future Bulma for never thinking to tell them this before. Without further delay, everyone headed there, but as they approached the direction of Dr. Gero's laboratory, they sensed a gigantic, monstrous ki appearing at the location, far greater than anything they had ever felt. Upon arrival, they found the mountain housing the laboratory completely destroyed. Emerging from the smoke was a strange insect-like humanoid figure wearing a smug and satisfied smile, clearly pleased with the advantageous situation. The being introduced himself as Cell, the bio-android created by Dr. Gero, who had returned from a distant future to absorb androids 17 and 18 to achieve his perfect form. Everyone was shocked by this revelation, wondering what had become of the Cell of their present, The Cell before them assured them not to worry. He had already destroyed the underground laboratory where his past self was being developed, ensuring that only one perfect being would exist in the universe regardless of the timeline. Cell, brimming with confidence over having quickly and easily achieved his perfect form, invited everyone to attack him simultaneously to test his immense new power, despite being quite hungry after not having the chance to feed on the energy of millions of humans as in the original timeline. As everyone prepared to attack, Present Bardock suddenly burst into a loud laugh, confusing everyone with his attitude. He, who was usually the most concerned about the situation, was now taking it the lightest. This perplexed even his future self until the latter understood why he was laughing. Future Bardock asked Present Bardock if he had achieved it. When Present Bardock confirmed with a nod while finishing his laughter, Future Bardock also began to laugh, enraging Cell at what he perceived as a blatant insult. In a way, Cell was right. The laughter was indeed meant as a mockery, but it also signified something more. For the first time since Future Bardock had arrived 3 years prior to warn them of the impending threats, Present Bardock felt deeply relieved. The battle was over before it even began. Unable to tolerate the mockery and arrogance, Cell decided not to wait for them to attack and lunged directly at Present Bardock to kill him. However, Bardock swiftly moved away from the group and exploded into an enormous aura of electric ki in the sky. Cell could not believe the power he was sensing. Kakarot and Raditz also realized what was happening and began laughing, understanding that their father had outsmarted everyone, even them, after years of training together. Present Bardock revealed to everyone, including Cell, that he had achieved Super Saiyan 2. His immense power far exceeded that of Cell, who, despite his perfect form, had not received any Zenkai boosts and was even weaker than his original timeline counterpart, having absorbed far fewer humans before merging with the androids. Thanks to his sustained Saiyan youth, Present Bardock had gone beyond what his future self had been able to achieve and attained the same power his future self had only briefly experienced before becoming too old to reach it again. Seeing the grand scheme of things, Bardock realized that Cell posed no real threat. Despite Cell's desperate and arrogant attacks, Bardock effortlessly dodged every one, eventually trapping Cell and throwing him high into the sky, nearly leaving Earth's atmosphere. Bardock then unleashed a massive ki attack, completely disintegrating the creature without leaving any chance for regeneration. Everyone was left stunned by the anticlimactic end. However, with Cell defeated, the androids were also no longer a threat. This marked the end of the android saga, with the time travelers having successfully altered the future to create a better present, albeit in another timeline. After all that, technically the events of the android saga had concluded. There wasn't much left for Future Bardock and Future Trunks to do, though they would still face serious problems upon returning to the future. Future Bardock remained an elderly man incapable of accessing his former powers, and Trunks was still too weak and inexperienced to defeat the surviving android, let alone the Cell who would awaken in their distant future. However, Present Bardock had an idea, a gift to offer his future self. Bardock gathered the Dragon Balls and summoned Shenron, wishing for Future Bardock to regain the youth of his present counterpart. Future Bardock immediately felt the effects of the wish, regaining his youthful appearance and the prolonged Saiyan vitality. Thanks to this unexpected gift from his past self, Future Bardock was now able to tap into his true warrior potential once again. He quickly regained control over Super Saiyan 1 and 2, enabling him to train Trunks for a few more years to prepare him for future threats. This ensured that when the distant day arrived when Future Bardock would die of old age, Earth's future would be safe under Trunks' protection. Future Bardock expressed his immense gratitude to his past self for the opportunity he had given them. Following this, he and Trunks returned to the future. With his youth and powers restored, Future Bardock wasted no time in confronting the surviving android. Transforming into Super Saiyan 2, he obliterated the android instantly, putting an end to any android threat. 3 years later, Future Bardock similarly dispatched the alternate Cell, who was still in his imperfect form and thus far easier to defeat. At last, the future was safe, at least for the time being. In the present, life resumed its course. However, everyone continued training as much as they could, especially Vegeta, who felt utterly useless with his second-grade Super Saiyan power. Determined to catch up, he resolved to give it his all to attain the same power Bardock had used against Cell. Although Gine wasn't a warrior or passionate about training, she refused to waste the training she had undergone during those 3 years just because the world was now at peace. The future had taught them that a new threat could always emerge, capable of taking everything from them. While training wasn't her primary focus and she didn't do it as intensely as the rest of her family, she continued to train to maintain and refine the power she had gained. This also motivated her son Gohan to do the same, compelling Chi-Chi to allow him to balance his studies and training. After all, Gohan was a Saiyan and the son of Kakarot and grandson of Bardock. Denying that heritage would be cruel and foolish. Ultimately, Gine convinced Chi-Chi, albeit reluctantly, to be more flexible with Gohan's studies and free time activities. During this period, Goten was born. Bardock and Goku found it amusing that the second son resembled his father and grandfather far more than the first. The rest of the family continued training with Bardock, inspired by the power of Super Saiyan 2, which over the next 7 years, they all gradually achieved. Goku, Raditz, Gohan, and even Gine, though she was undoubtedly the weakest among them. Vegeta and Nappa also eventually reached Super Saiyan 2, but much later than the others and were still weaker than even Gine, a true disgrace, Vegeta thought. Ironically, he found himself trapped in a vicious cycle. The more Bardock's family surpassed him, the more he isolated himself to train harder. Yet by isolating himself and refusing to ask for their help, he limited his chances of catching up. Undoubtedly, Vegeta's pride was unparalleled, Nappa thought. Nappa continued training for the fun of it and to humor Vegeta, as he always had throughout his life. Unlike Vegeta, who lived off his wife, the daughter of the world's richest man, Nappa had to work for a living, offering his services as a bodyguard to the highest bidder. In recent years, he had become the personal bodyguard of a certain world martial arts champion, Mr. Satan, who, while far less renowned than in the original story for not defeating Cell, remained a high-caliber champion, very famous and wealthy, with Nappa also acting as the bodyguard for his daughter Videl. Eventually, Gohan began attending university in Orange City, which, in this timeline, had not been renamed Satan City. Events unfolded similarly to the original story, with Gohan briefly becoming the Great Saiyaman. After a few weeks of acting as a vigilante, Videl discovered Gohan's secret identity, forcing him to participate in the upcoming World Martial Arts Tournament and to teach her how to use Ki and fly so she wouldn't expose his secret. Bardock and Raditz mocked Gohan for being caught so easily by a human, however, their teasing turned to annoyance when Videl began visiting Mount Paozu daily to train. They found it very rude that she came to their home uninvited. Meanwhile, Chi-Chi and Gine were suspicious of the girl, exhibiting the typical maternal tendency to assume any girl interested in their son or grandson must have ulterior motives. The only one unconcerned and even amused by the situation was Goku, who actively helped Gohan become a better teacher for Videl. Despite being a mere human, she quickly learned how to use Ki and even fly, impressing everyone with her rapid progress despite her lack of basic Ki training. Even Bardock grew curious and respectful of her tenacity and fighting spirit, though he was also puzzled by her incredible potential for a human. Bardock theorized that humans, who seemed weak and lacking potential when he first arrived on Earth with his wife and son, might have the ability to grow in power and adapt to new training scales, much like Saiyans, albeit in a much slower and very different way. Still, it was intriguing to him. Over the course of the month Videl trained with Gohan and the rest of his family, she became a far more skilled and powerful warrior than in the original story. Thanks to the guidance of experienced warriors like Goku and Bardock, everyone grew excited to see a human becoming so strong in such a short time. Nostalgia for the World Martial Arts tournaments began to set in, prompting some of them to participate for fun. Nappa suggested it was also a good way to make quick money. He proposed letting Mr. Satan win in exchange for a share of the prize money, something he had been doing since the previous tournament alongside his bodyguard duties. Thus, Goku began traveling the world to recruit friends for the tournament. However, only Vegeta and Piccolo agreed to participate. The other humans, feeling too far behind in power, declined, and Krillin, who in this timeline had no push from Android 18 to participate and win the prize money, also turned down the offer. In the end, the adult category participants from their group were Goku, Gohan, Raditz, Bardock, Vegeta, Nappa, Piccolo, Videl, and Mr. Satan. In the junior division, while there were many children competing, the most significant participants were, of course, Goten and Trunks. Aside from the protagonist, other participants in the tournament included Yamu, Spopovich, and of course Supreme Kai, Shin, and Kibito. The junior division, which took place first, ended similarly to the original story. However, this time, Goten and Trunks were much more evenly matched in power and far stronger than their canonical counterparts. Both had already achieved Super Saiyan 2, astonishing the adults. Their match ended in a draw as they both fell out of the ring simultaneously. The adult category proceeded relatively similarly to the original story. The real change occurred during Videl's fight against Spopovich. Though it was tough and brutal battle for the young girl, her extra training with Gohan's family allowed her to defeat Spopovich in the end. Spopovich, enraged and wanting nothing more than to kill Videl, tried to climb back into the ring, but Yamu stopped him, reminding him of their mission and that they needed far more energy than the girl could provide. Begrudgingly, Spopovich held back his fury. The next fight was between Gohan and Kibito. The latter asked Gohan to transform into a Super Saiyan, to which Gohan responded by showing him something even better, Super Saiyan 2. Shin paralyzed Gohan just long enough for Yamu and Spopovich to steal his energy. Eventually, Gohan broke free of the paralysis as he was stronger in this timeline than in the original story. He pulled the needle-like energy extractor from his rib and delivered a tremendous punch to Yamu's face, sending him flying far away. Meanwhile, Spopovich, terrified, fled with the energy they had already stolen from Gohan. Although Gohan managed to break free from Shin's technique, he was left severely weakened and in pain from the energy extraction and the needle pierced into his ribs. Kibito quickly healed him, restoring all of his strength. Shin explained that there was no time for further details. They needed to follow the person who had just escaped immediately. Goten and Trunks were tasked with staying behind to watch over the unconscious Yamu, who was still lying on the ground after Gohan's punch. During the flight, Shin explained to the warriors about Majin Buu and how Babidi was on the verge of reviving him. Bardock found the name oddly familiar, certain he had heard it somewhere before, possibly even from Frieza himself during his years of service in the Empire, but he wasn't sure. Eventually, they arrived at a desert area where Babidi had buried his ship underground. Babidi took the energy extractor from Spopovich, then killed him by making him explode, as he was no longer useful. Dabura then pointed out that he was aware of the warrior's presence, shocking everyone. Before Kibito could be disintegrated, Bardock stepped in to defend the Supreme Kai's apprentice, engaging Dabura in a brief fight. Dabura retreated at Babidi's request, entering the wizard's ship and challenging the warriors to follow. Despite it obviously being a trap, the Saiyans couldn't help but feel excited about this new and mysterious challenge after years of peace, much to Shin's despair. The battles against Babidi's minions inside the ship unfolded as in the original story, with Vegeta growing increasingly frustrated and furious. He had wanted to fight Kakarot or Bardock in the tournament. Eventually, they reached the fight against Dabura. Gohan fought him as in the original timeline, but the difference here was that Gohan was much stronger. He had better control over his power and Super Saiyan 2, having achieved a better balance between training and studies thanks to his grandmother. Though not absurdly more powerful than during the Cell games, he was strong enough to completely dominate Dabura, ultimately defeating him. For Gohan, this was a unique experience. It was technically his first real battle. After Dabura's defeat, Babidi began to panic, needing more time and energy to awaken Majin Buu. Desperate, he decided to search the hearts and minds of the warriors to possess one of them. Unfortunately, only one was viable for control. The others were too powerful and purified of their past evil to be controlled. Babidi initiated his attempt to control Vegeta. Vegeta, however, only pretended to be controlled, accepting Babidi's power purely to turn the situation to his advantage. He wanted, at last, to fight Bardock. His resentment toward Bardock stemmed from the latter being a low-class Saiyan who became the first Super Saiyan in history, and a warrior who consistently matched or surpassed the elite, a fact that had always driven Vegeta mad. Over the years, as Vegeta struggled to surpass Bardock's family, his frustration only grew, especially now that even Gine was stronger than him. Babidi teleported everyone to different locations to buy time, while Vegeta and Bardock began their fight. Bardock was furious that despite all this time on Earth, Vegeta still didn't understand how useless the Saiyan pride in social classes and battle power rankings was. Bardock was determined to teach Vegeta a lesson he would never forget. And that was exactly what he did. Despite the power boost Vegeta received, it was simply not enough. In this timeline, Gine was as strong as Goku during the Buu saga in the original story, though she couldn't access Super Saiyan 3. Vegeta, meanwhile, had the same level of power as in the original story, including the boost from Babidi. Gine was the weakest member of Bardock's family by far. However, Bardock has spent over 7 years training and perfecting his Super Saiyan 2 form. The fight was effortlessly one-sided for the veteran Saiyan, who brutally and humiliatingly defeated Vegeta before knocking him unconscious on the spot. Bardock stared at Vegeta's limp body with deep disgust for his behavior, befitting the royalty he came from. Spitting on Vegeta's unconscious form, Bardock tossed a Senzu bean beside him before leaving to rejoin his family. Unfortunately, by the time Bardock returned to the area near Babidi's ship entrance, it was already too late. Between Gohan's superior energy, which Yamu and Spelpovich had stolen, the devastating beating Bardock had delivered to Majin Vegeta, and Gohan's fight against Dabura, it was enough to finally awaken Majin Buu. The timing of Majin Buu's emergence coincided almost exactly with Bardock's return. Everyone was perplexed and confused by the appearance of a fat pink demon behaving foolishly and seemingly cognitively impaired. Even Babidi was surprised and disappointed by the result. Bardock couldn't believe his eyes, struggling to comprehend that this goofy, chubby pink creature was the terrifying Majin Buu from the legends and myths he had heard about throughout the universe during his years as a soldier in Frieza's army. Bardock asked Supreme Kai if this truly was Majin Buu. Shin confirmed that it was indeed Majin Buu and warned that they shouldn't judge him by his appearance or behavior. Despite his contrasting character, the creature was still cruel beyond measure. With Shin's confirmation, Bardock knew exactly what he needed to do. He told his two sons to watch carefully as they would need to take up the responsibility of defending Earth and becoming stronger. It was time for them to stop relying on him to handle everything. This would be his last time stepping in. Goku and Raditz were confused by his words and began to worry. Was Bardock planning to sacrifice himself to defeat Majin Buu? No, Bardock assured them. He had no intention of dying, at least not willingly. However, he explained that his prolonged Saiyan youth was nearing its end. In a few short years, his body would no longer be able to keep up with his sons and the other warriors. It would be their turn to innovate and push their limits to prepare for any threat. He urged them to pay close attention to what was about to happen so they could follow his example. With his speech directed at his sons, his family, his grandchildren, and even the other Saiyans like Vegeta and Nappa, Bardock began to transform. First, he ascended to Super Saiyan, then Super Saiyan 2, but he didn't stop there. He unleashed a pressure so intense that it pushed everyone back several meters. As he screamed, his vocal cords strained under the intense effort it took to access the next form. Finally, as the golden light surrounding his body dissipated, everyone gazed in astonishment at Bardock's new form. He had become Super Saiyan 3. The power Bardock now exuded was so overwhelming that even Majin Buu stopped his antics to observe the strange long-haired golden warrior. However, Buu didn't have much time to process the situation. Bardock wasted no time and attacked Majin Buu with all the brutal force of a seasoned Saiyan warrior, aiming to kill the magical creature as quickly as possible. Babidi was left stupefied by the unexpected display of speed and power, attempting once more to use his magic to aid Buu. However, Piccolo stepped in and, as in the original story, swiftly cut Babidi in half with a single blow, leaving him to bleed out and die from the sheer brutality of the attack, with no chance for Majin Buu to heal him. In this timeline, Majin Buu wouldn't be able to heal or save Babidi as Bardock was delivering the beating of a lifetime to the magical creature. This Bardock was as powerful as Ultimate Gohan from the original story, and despite Buu's regeneration abilities, Bardock's power was more than sufficient to overwhelm them. He inflicted damage faster than Buu could recover. As Bardock pushed the battle higher and higher into the sky to protect Earth, he waited for the perfect opportunity. Once Majin Buu was in a position that pointed into space from Bardock's perspective, Bardock unleashed a devastating ki attack with all the power he could muster. The attack was designed to ensure that Buu's regeneration wouldn't save him, blasting the creature out of Earth's atmosphere while disintegrating him entirely. Majin Buu couldn't comprehend what was happening due to how quickly it all unfolded, but finally, Majin Buu had completely been destroyed. Exhausted, Bardock returned to his base form and began falling rapidly toward Earth. To ensure Majin Buu wouldn't survive the attack, Bardock had poured almost all of his energy into the final blow, leaving him unable to stay airborne. Fortunately, Goku caught him before he could crash into the ground. With Majin Buu and Babidi eliminated, the Earth was saved once again. Supreme Kai, Shin, and Kibito expressed their relief that it was over. Shortly afterward, Vegeta arrived at the scene, having awakened and eaten the Senzu bean Bardock had left for him earlier. Deeply humiliated and with his pride completely shattered, Vegeta finally realized that he would never surpass Bardock's family. He quietly left the area and returned to the Capsule Corporation, unwilling even to witness the tournament's conclusion if the others returned to it. Bardock took another Senzu bean to restore his energy, and was relieved to know that the power he had used had been enough. Goku and Raditz were filled with admiration for Bardock and the immense power he had displayed, both vowing to someday achieve Super Saiyan 3 themselves. Supreme Kai and Kibito thanked the group for their help in stopping Majin Buu and commended their efficiency in defeating him quickly despite his release. Shin assured them that if they ever needed assistance or wanted to train on his planet, they should contact him, and he would come to find them. With that, Shin and Kibito bid farewell to the mortals and returned to the realm of the Supreme Kais. The remaining warriors returned to the tournament to finish it together, even if the conclusion was obvious. Mr. Satan, the World Martial Arts Champion, was still going to win. However, this time, Bardock's family ensured they would take a good share of the prize money while also enjoying themselves and relaxing by fighting strategically and with restraint, as in the tournaments of old. Bardock felt satisfied with all he had achieved in his long life by Saiyan standards. He had saved his family, avenged his race and planet by destroying Frieza, successfully protected his new home of Earth multiple times, and inspired his sons one last time to continue the legacy of protecting their family and this planet. Now, Bardock and Gine could simply watch from the stands as their sons and grandchildren fought in the tournament, proud to know that their Saiyan legacy would not be lost to the sands of time. Kakarot, Raditz, Gohan, and Goten would carry forward the legacy Bardock had built for all of them. Despite the emotional weight of the situation, everything ended that day on a humorous note. Yamu finally woke up from the punch Gohan had landed hours earlier. Completely confused and disoriented by what had happened, Yamu, now powerless after losing the enhancements granted by Babidi, fled the tournament grounds in a panic, shouting about the yellow insect possessing him again. The crowd and remaining tournament attendees were baffled but ultimately dismissed him as a simple lunatic. The world would never hear of that madman again. After the defeat of Majin Buu by the powerful and veteran warrior Bardock, his sons, his family, and the rest of the Saiyans on Earth wanted to follow his example, with the goal of reaching the same power he used to defeat Majin Buu, Super Saiyan 3. Bardock truly hoped that they would surpass him very soon due to the need to create new strong and powerful warriors to defend Earth, knowing that his Saiyan youth was nearing its end. Eventually, Goku and Raditz would be the first to reach Super Saiyan 3, with Bardock guiding his sons with his experienced warrior advice on how to handle the extreme energy drain of that form. Vegeta, humiliated by the tremendous defeat he had received at the hands of Bardock, would continue training harder than before, becoming a very unbearable person to live with, even for Bulma. However, he endured Vegeta's amplified bad temper, knowing that deep down, he suffered deeply from not being powerful enough to protect Earth like Goku's family could. Lacking other options, one day Vegeta would go to visit Kami-sama, asking him to modify the Room of Time so that the time limit for training there would be more than just 2 years. After much persuasion, he agreed to do so, allowing the prince to train several years inside to increase his power as much as he could, with Nappa also joining him but much less regularly than before. After all, although a bit younger than Bardock and Gine, Nappa also had to start taking care of himself to avoid losing his Saiyan youth too quickly. Eventually, Vegeta would also manage to reach Super Saiyan 3, but just barely, and the energy drain was so massive and ridiculous that it was practically useless. The prince wondered how Bardock and his family could use the form so efficiently, something that made him even sicker, making him unsatisfied even after all that sacrifice and training. Resigned, he returned to Capsule Corporation to keep training as he always did. Eventually, Beerus, the god of destruction, would awaken, surprised to hear that a relatively decent number of Saiyans had survived the destruction of Planet Vegeta, and that one of them had killed Frieza and King Cold at the same time, a fact that quite shocked Beerus and awakened his curiosity to meet those Saiyans, and see if one of them was the Super Saiyan god of his dreams. This time, due to Gine's pressure to remember Bulma's birthday, everyone would attend the cruise where her birthday was being celebrated, with even Goku being present, so Beerus arrived there from the very beginning of his search for the Super Saiyan god. Here, the notable difference was that Bardock and Gine, being veteran Saiyans who still had ancient knowledge of their culture before the destruction of planet Sadala, could explain to everyone what the Super Saiyan god was, its legend, and how it was created. However, it was such an ancient and blurry myth in the memory of Saiyan culture that it was considered more of a tale, part of their mythology than part of reality. Unlike the Super Saiyan, which everyone was convinced existed but didn't know if it could appear again someday. That was all. Beerus then, after enjoying the delicious food that Earth could provide, already leaving him very happy and satisfied, especially without the presence of Majin Buu there, demanded that everyone perform the ritual to summon the fabled Super Saiyan god. Everyone wanted to perform the ritual on Bardock, but he refused, explaining to everyone and his sons that this was the moment they had been waiting for. It was exactly as he had told them after defeating Majin Buu. Now it was their turn to fight and rise to power levels unattainable for an old Saiyan nearing the end of his youth like Bardock. He wanted to create 2 Super Saiyan gods to everyone's amazement, those 2 being Goku and Raditz, who accepted, moved by the confidence and pride their father felt toward them. What they didn't take into account was that there was only 9 Saiyans there, even counting the hybrids. Even with the revelation of Videl's pregnancy, it still wouldn't be enough. They needed 10 Saiyans to transfer their pure hearts to the hearts of the 2 Saiyans who were going to receive all that energy. That is, Goku and Raditz. Beerus was too excited not to help them. The idea of having 2 Super Saiyan gods was too tempting, so he proposed his help. Well, he proposed that Whis help them, in reality. Whis proposed to restore the energy of those who participated in the ritual so they could continue giving their energy to the next Saiyan, impacting everyone with the knowledge that Whis could do that. But then Vegeta spoke up, asking if Whis could do that. Theoretically, they could do it with much more than just 2 Saiyans, with Beerus displaying a gigantic smile on his face, understanding where Vegeta was going, getting increasingly excited about what was going to happen. He agreed to help as much as possible to create as many Super Saiyan gods as they could. However, for that to work, some would have to stay behind and not transform so they would have the necessary people for the ritual. Gine, Nappa, Goten, Trunks, and Videl, pregnant with Pan, would be the ones to stay behind to perform the ritual on each of the Saiyans. And so, after some tedious minutes of preparation, with Whis' assistance, multiple Super Saiyan gods would be created. Goku, Raditz, Vegeta, Gohan, and even Bardock had all become Super Saiyan gods, provoking a state of ecstasy and euphoria in Beerus, who, without further ado, demanded that everyone move away from the crews to fight as soon as possible, with everyone agreeing. The fight would be extremely dangerous for Earth's well-being, but all the Saiyans there would be equally exhilarated to unleash such power. Although they would have liked to fight on their own, instead Beerus was over the moon, having never felt so exhilarated in his life. At least not since he officially became the god of destruction of Universe 7. Of course, all those Saiyans were still infinitely weaker than him, even fighting together, but they were also much stronger than in the original story, especially Goku, Raditz, and Bardock, with them having much higher power similar to what they would have in later sagas of Super at that point. Despite all of this, one of them was not giving their best, or at least did not seem as immersed in the battle as the others, that being Bardock. His fight along with his sons, grandson, and Vegeta was more of a support, aiding the younger Saiyans while he had a more introspective analysis of his new power and himself as a warrior. It was so strange. This form of Super Saiyan God completely restored his youth, as if he were still a young Saiyan warrior of no more than 2 or 3 decades of life. Of course, Saiyans could maintain their youth until they were 80 years old, but that didn't change that inside they still aged like any human, especially in the psychological aspect. After all, it was strange, so uncommon for a Saiyan to reach his age. Most of them died before even becoming adults. Seeing an elderly Saiyan was something exceptional, almost magical. Despite this, there he was with the rest of his family and the heir to his race's throne, having regained his old vitality and youth thanks to this form, questioning if this was the end of everything for him, if his potential had truly finished developing, or now with his new opening toward the realm of the gods, he might still have something more to do, something more to contribute as a warrior. But also he questioned the warrior's sentiment and the instinct to fight inherent to any Saiyan. Was it really something inherent to their race that was embedded in their genes, or was it simply that none of them lived long enough to grow old, and thus simply calm down and relax? All these questions would provoke a sea of doubts in Bardock's mind, wondering if his contribution to the new generations was still necessary, or if it was time, like any mortal, to rest and relax. Or maybe he simply needed another motivation. Another motivation beyond the pure Saiyan instinct and pride to fight selfishly for his own pleasure and satisfaction. After all, Gine started training only to cheer and motivate Gohan to train like the rest of the family. She didn't do it for herself, she did it out of love for her grandson. Maybe he had to conceive his motivations in the same way from now on to continue fighting, simply to support and inspire his children and grandchildren to keep moving forward, to surpass their limits so that eventually his lineage would be assured for the distant future. In that way, his children could also support their descendants when they no longer had the fire and vitality that the impulsiveness of youth offers. It was after this realization and new motivation to keep fighting that Beerus would launch his gigantic solar energy attack toward all the Super Saiyan gods, who had already lost their form but continued fighting in Super Saiyan with the very essence of the Super Saiyan god having been absorbed within them. With Bardock being the last to maintain that form as he had not worn out as much and had been the last to undergo the ritual. Seeing that his sons, grandson, and Vegeta were struggling to stop Beerus' attack, which was much more powerful than in the original story because he had used much more power, Bardock would stand in front of them, inspiring them not to give up, to keep drawing much more power from themselves, realizing that the divine energy of the Super Saiyan God was still in them even without the form, and that they had to take advantage of it to repel the attack, with everyone regaining the motivation to keep fighting, inspired by the veteran Saiyan's speech, with him once again surpassing his limits. Not to feel proud of his power, or for the selfish need to feel pleasure in fighting, but to protect his family, those he loves, and his new home, Earth, making Bardock use Super Saiyan beyond the Super Saiyan God, briefly transforming into Super Saiyan Blue to the surprised and shocked looks of everyone. Remembering the very similar attack that Frieza had once launched at him and that he couldn't stop, but this time he was powerful enough to do so, returning the attack combined with the power of his sons, grandson, and Vegeta, but added to his new power 50 times superior of Super Saiyan Blue, being a surprise that Beerus wouldn't expect. And as he hadn't used enough power to deal with Bardock's new power, receiving his attack back, he would suffer quite considerable damage. Of course, not enough to take him out of the fight or significantly hurt him, but enough to notice that what was about to happen would hurt him at least a little. And so, Bardock, along with everyone, would finally return Beerus' attack amplified with their own powers. With Bardock soon losing Super Saiyan Blue and Super Saiyan God, with all the other Saiyans likewise returning to their base forms, exhausted and without energy after such an exhausting fight. Beerus would catch them all and bring them back to Earth, leaving them on the cruise where everything had begun, with everyone being surprised that despite having so many Super Saiyan gods, it was still not enough to defeat Beerus. But he would equally not destroy the Earth, satisfied with the great fight and even moments of challenge he had, looking attentively at Bardock in particular, asking Whis if he had really done what he thought, with Whis confirming it. Confirming that Bardock had even surpassed the power of the Super Saiyan God, with Beerus being extremely satisfied and happy to have so many potential rivals who, without a doubt, with the right training could someday rival him, especially Bardock, at least probably. But for now, it was time to return to his destroyer planet, but promising that very soon he would return to learn more about the progress of those Saiyans and, who knows, take them to his planet to receive the proper training as well, with Beerus and Whis ending up leaving the party much more satisfied and happy with what happened than in the original story. After that, the Saiyans would wake up from the coma they had fallen into after such a fight, with everyone telling them what had happened, with Bardock and the others now anxious to know what the future held for them if they were going to receive such advanced training as that of a god of destruction. Although Bardock would do it more than anything because now he had obtained a new motivation, the motivation to protect his family and those he loved, having deliberately lost all traces of pride or selfish desire typical of a Saiyan due to his age, with Gine being happy about her husband's resolution. Finally, understanding much better the pacifist but strong-willed attitude of his wife, understanding each other much better than when they were young. Eventually, after a few months, Beerus would send Whis to fetch the Saiyans he fought on Earth to bring them to his planet for the Angels' training. Everyone was excited about the new challenge ahead, although Gohan would not go with them as he was too busy with his studies, so Nappa would replace him to train with the rest of the Saiyans. A real shame, Whis would think, but that was the nature of hybrid Saiyans who did not possess the same vitality and passion for training and combat as pure Saiyans. Truly a pity. In any case, once they arrived on Beerus' planet and the training had begun, everyone started with a huge advantage from the beginning, knowing that there was a level beyond Super Saiyan God thanks to Bardock, with him soon being able to recover that power, followed by the others shortly after. Although Nappa had much more difficulty as he had to start his training from scratch, first needing to learn to use Divine Ki before even aspiring to use Super Saiyan God, being undoubtedly the weakest of all there. During that time, on Earth, one day the Ginyu Force along with Sorbet and Tagoma would have come with the intention of using Earth's Dragon Balls to revive Frieza, and why not, also King Cold. Thanks to Pilaf's gang having already gathered practically all the Dragon Balls, it would be very easy to force them to help summon the dragon. But evidently by doing so, the sky would darken all over Earth, with everyone there understanding what was happening. Now, in the original story, they might have acted quickly, making their wish, but here, the problem was that Frieza and Cole did not die on Earth, but on another planet, first having to transport their souls to Earth to then resurrect them with a second wish. Due to this problem and their ignorance of how the Dragon Balls worked with the proper way to formulate their wishes, someone would arrive in time to stop them, that person being Gine, to everyone's surprise. And despite how worrying it would be that they had been discovered, in truth, everyone would laugh quite a lot at the reinforcements they had sent. That it was Gine of all warriors who arrived was laughable, with Ginyu remembering how weak Bardock's woman was back in his day. So weak she wasn't even worth sending on space missions with the rest of her race, not even the low-class Saiyans. But Gine would completely ignore those cruel comments, and without further ado, she would transform into Super Saiyan 2 to show her absolute domination over them, and one by one, she would take down all the Ginyu Force, Sorbet, and Tagoma. After that, she would pick up one of the scouters that had survived her attacks and speak through it to the rest of Frieza's remaining army fleets, warning that if they tried to resurrect Frieza or his father with Earth's Dragon Balls, they would all meet the same fate as the Ginyu Force, Sorbet, and Tagoma, with Berry Blue having no choice but to accept defeat, not attempting another invasion of Earth for the time being, thus preventing Frieza's resurrection. Shortly after that failed attempt to revive Frieza and Cold, Champa would one day appear on Beerus' planet, leading to the idea of organizing a tournament between Universe 6 and 7 to obtain the Super Dragon Balls as a prize, with Champa promising that he would wish to move Earth to Universe 6 if he won, something that would shock everyone and infuriate Bardock even more, motivated to do everything to ensure none of those gods got their whims fulfilled. As such, there would be no problem regarding the choice of participants, as they were already present on Beerus' planet, evidently being Goku, Raditz, Vegeta, Nappa, and Bardock. Although they would also take advantage of the 3 available days to return to Earth and perhaps train for a few years in the Room of Time to become as strong as possible, while Bulma built a Super Dragon Radar to find the last one that Champa hadn't yet found. Bardock, worried they might lose and thus be transported to a universe they knew absolutely nothing about, would motivate everyone to prepare and train as hard as possible, with the 5 warriors deciding to train 3 years in the Room of Time at once, even if that would shorten Bardock and Nappa's Saiyan youth even further. Thanks to much more effective training from everyone training in there simultaneously, and with the bonus that they were already more powerful than in the original story, they would all ensure they were powerful enough for the tournament. Eventually, they would all head to the nameless planet for the tournament to take place. After the qualifying exam, the tournament would begin, with Bardock deciding to be the one to fight first, and perhaps last, as he did not want to give the other universe any chance to win. With Earth's fate at stake, knowing his sons were still too young and impulsive to understand the need to put aside their taste for challenges and selfishly fought battles, even if that endangered the lives of those they love and Earth. Therefore, Bardock would decide to do it all on his own, although he wouldn't say this aloud, just a thought he would keep to himself. Bardock would then fight first against Botomo, and in just a few seconds he would find and defeat him, throwing him out of the tournament platform. The next fight would be against Frost, with Bardock feeling deep disgust toward this being so similar to Frieza, not giving him any chance to transform or cheat, defeating him with a single blow before he could do or show anything. The third fight would be against Vegeta, having a bit more difficulty due to the crystal surrounding the platform that would reduce his oxygen levels and make him feel extreme heat. But Bardock being Bardock, it wouldn't take long for him to accidentally insult Vegeta, and thanks to that, defeating him with the least difficulties despite the extreme conditions Champa had arranged for this fight with the Metal Man. However, the next fight would be much more interesting and friendly for Bardock, quickly understanding that this young Saiyan comparable to the ancient Saiyans of Sadala was not a malevolent or dangerous being, helping him similarly to how Vegeta did in the original story, to transform him into Super Saiyan and then defeating him with a single blow in Super Saiyan 2, conserving his energy as much as possible as he did not have the arrogance of a young Saiyan like Vegeta to show off his true power before an inferior and kind being like Cabba, with him considering Bardock as a master for whom he had much admiration for his veteran status, asking him to teach him more the next time they met, with Bardock considering the possibility of one day visiting the Sadala planet of Universe 6 with his wife to meet a version of their race where they had ended up surviving and being good. The last fight would be against Hit. having a very similar course to the original story, with Bardock having few problems thanks to his veteran warrior experience in understanding Hit's time skip and how to predict where he would attack. With just Super Saiyan God, thanks to having much more power than Goku in the original story, he would be able to surpass Hit's power by far, and therefore be immune to Hit's time skip, defeating him relatively easily, although respecting that warrior and assassin for his very skilled techniques and abilities. And so, in the blink of an eye, to Beerus's pure satisfaction and Champa's greatest horror, Bardock would have won the tournament, with the others not being able to fight to their greatest frustration, but at least ensuring the preservation of Earth in Universe 7. Moments later, Zeno would appear there, having an interaction similar to the original story with Goku, although Bardock would force his son to behave better toward that strange being that terrified even the gods of destruction. After that, Champa would leave, returning to his universe disappointed by the pathetic performance of his warriors, although surprised to know a few minutes later that Universe 6's Earth had been revived, thanks to the wish Beerus made to his brother, more out of mockery or debt to his brother rather than kindness or affection. A few months after the tournament between Universe 6 and 7, one day the time machine that hadn't been seen in years would reappear outside Capsule Corporation, with everyone going to rescue whoever was inside that capsule being only future Trunks. When he woke up, he would be so traumatized by what happened in the future that he would mistake Bardock and Goku for his enemy, attacking them both without thinking until he was stopped by his mother for such a stupid action. He would explain everything that happened in the future and how after several years, when it seemed that peace could finally return after all the horrible things that happened with the androids and the death of all the warriors, a new enemy would appear, looking exactly like Goku, or rather Bardock, recognizing that characteristic scar of the veteran Saiyan. This being that Bulma called Black intended to come to fulfill a mission accompanied by a divine purpose, that of eliminating the scum that were the mortals, starting to literally commit genocide without stopping against the entire human race. Bardock and Trunks tried everything they could to stop him, and despite both being vastly stronger than in the original story, even having Super Saiyan 3, it still wasn't enough. Simply, this Black seemed to have a very different potential than any ordinary Saiyan or Bardock. After a year of that hell in which they tried to resist Black's massacre as much as they could, Bulma would finally manage to reactivate the time machine and load its fuel, although it would only serve for one trip. Unfortunately, that was when Black appeared, killing Bulma instantly, to the greatest horror and fury of both Bardock and especially Trunks, with the two engaging in an intense battle fueled by their rage. Bardock knew they wouldn't survive this time if they kept going like that, so he pushed Trunks out of the combat zone, telling him to hurry and go to the past to seek help. Trunks, with a broken heart and shattered morale, agreed, and shortly after, Black ended up killing Bardock, with him fighting to the last moment to protect the little that remained of his adopted planet, with Trunks barely escaping from Black before he could destroy him in the time machine. After that horrible story, and with the details of Black's appearance and everything he wore provided by Trunks, Beerus and Whis started to have suspicions about who could be behind all of this, deciding to pay a small visit to Universe 10, while the rest of the warriors prepared to go to the future. Unfortunately, by the time they were ready to travel to the future, the time machine could not hold so many people inside, making it impossible for all the Saiyan warriors to go to the future. But at least Bardock, Goku, and Vegeta would go, with the latter insisting on going despite knowing that Raditz was more powerful than him, for the simple reason of feeling it very personal since it was about his son, besides his wife's death in the future. So the four would travel to the future, tightly packed in the machine, and upon arrival, Trunks would be relieved to know that Mai had suffered Black's last attack, giving her a Senzu bean to heal her wounds instantly, with Bardock feeling the greatest embarrassment he had felt even for his son when he openly said he had never kissed his wife. A total madness, wondering how on earth his son had conceived two children without kissing Chi-Chi. Just that barbaric thought provoked great disgust and embarrassment in Bardock. After that, and giving food brought in capsules to the survivors, they would all go after Black, quickly grabbing his attention with a ki blast that Vegeta would shoot into the air, determined to defeat that imposter of Bardock. Black would be surprised to see them in the future, knowing that they had all been dead for decades and that he had just killed Bardock a few days ago. Vegeta would transform into Super Saiyan Blue, ready to fight Black, with him only being able to access Super Saiyan 2 at the moment, but much more powerful than Goku Black in the original story. So even with such an inferior transformation, his raw power was vastly superior to Vegeta's, as he couldn't compete with the original Bardock's power, being brutally humiliated and beaten by Black. Bardock would say enough of this nonsense. It was enough. They had to finish him off now and stop fighting stupidly, and separately for some kind of pride, with him being the next to fight Black, and here things would be very different. Bardock would transform into Super Saiyan Blue, and after just a few very powerful blows to destabilize Black, he would try to finish him off immediately with a barrage of energy, one that unfortunately failed, as Black was saved by a mysterious ally, none other than Zamasu, understanding instantly who it was due to the explanations from Beerus before leaving the past. He would heal Black, with him receiving a massive Zenkai that increased his power considerably, now obtaining Super Saiyan Rose, greatly complicating the fight. But Bardock would still not lose hope, telling Kakarot and Trunks to protect Vegeta and hold Zamasu away from Black to prevent him from healing him, while he went to kill him once and for all. But now the fight was much more balanced, with Black being the most powerful at that moment, arrogantly thinking that he had finally brought his body to a new type of superior potential thanks to his divine essence. But Bardock would mock that statement, declaring that only he, a true Saiyan, was capable of exploiting that body's potential, and that he would prove it. And next, Bardock would have broken his limits again, reaching a new form he had obtained and mastered during his 3 years of training in the Room of Time with the others before the tournament against Universe 6, that power being Super Saiyan Blue Evolution. With that power being more than enough to dominate Black brutally once again, and in just a few seconds he would find the perfect opportunity to disintegrate that damned imposter once and for all. And while launching his final attack on Black, for a moment he would activate Kaioken over Super Saiyan Blue Evolution to ensure that Black wouldn't survive that attack, ending up killing and eliminating the threat of Black in that way. Zamasu would curse what his divine eyes had just witnessed, having lost the opportunity to fuse with his other self, with those declarations being enough to understand that Black was just another Zamasu from another time who had stolen Bardock's body, surely with the Super Dragon Balls. Now having all the necessary information, Bardock would proceed to finish off Zamasu, who was vastly weaker than Black, or any of them for that matter. Even Trunks could defeat him. But to his surprise and horror, Zamasu would regenerate from every attack thrown at him, with him wearing a wicked smile, declaring that he was an immortal being and therefore impossible to kill, no matter how powerful they were. That would at first glance be a serious problem, but Bardock would smile arrogantly, understanding what he had to do. He would ask his son and Trunks to hold Zamasu a little longer while he went somewhere to recover something. Bardock would head to Master Roshi's island, which had been abandoned for a long time, although still with Kame House intact, and he would search through Roshi's things to find a jar that could serve and a seal. A seal for the Mafuba technique, which Bardock would have undoubtedly learned after all those decades living on Earth. He would take the jar with the seal and return to where the others were with Zamasu. Upon arriving, Goku would instantly understand what his father was about to do, smiling at such an ingenious plan. Bardock would ask his son and Trunks to grab Zamasu with all their strength and throw him in his direction at his signal. They agreed, and after Bardock gave his signal, he would launch the Mafuba attack, capturing Zamasu in the jar that would serve as a container, and shortly after placing the seal on the jar, thus neutralizing all threats congregating in Trunks' future. Although Bardock would end up very exhausted and fainting because he had pushed his body too much in a short time, first using Super Saiyan Blue Evolution with Kaioken and then that, normally that technique wouldn't tire him so much with his current power, but he had already lost a lot of his energy. At least he had survived using such a technique that would have killed him in the past. Upon returning to the past, they would explain to everyone and Beerus and Whis what had happened, with them cursing Zamasu and the stupid Goasu for not choosing their students better, with Whis taking the sealed immortal Zamasu to store him in a safe place where he would never escape, and then returning to Universe 10 to finish off the present Zamasu and thus prevent him from committing madness like in the future. And so, all the threats would have been resolved, although that did not mean that Trunks' future was still devastated and with few humans left alive. Undoubtedly, there would be much to rebuild, but at least some of the humans he formed a friendship with and Mai herself were still alive, enough reason to keep the hope that they would eventually recover from such trauma. Returning to that future eventually after resting a few days in the present, thanking everyone for their help, and also deeply thanking his mentor Bardock, who at least in the present would continue living for a while with the rest of his family and friends. After all those events, 9 extra months of peace would pass where everyone continued training while enjoying that tranquility. But one day, Goku would feel that the whole situation was very boring. There was no challenge, absolutely nothing to face or push him to improve. Almost regretting that his mother had prevented the resurrection of Frieza and King Cold. So he would use the button that Zeno gave him during one of his visits shortly after the events of Black to go to his palace and remind him of the promise of the tournament between various universes, with Zeno accepting, being very bored without his future version to play with. When Goku would return to Earth, the one who would give him a beating wouldn't be Beerus, but Bardock himself, being more than furious because his son had been so incredibly stupid, especially when Daishinkan would appear to reveal when the tournament would occur and the consequences for the losers, almost giving Bardock an embolism from how much he wanted to strangle his son to death at that moment, thinking that even he hadn't been so selfish and blinded by his selfish desire to fight when he was young. But, well, what's done is done, and despite the relationship with his son being damaged, perhaps permanently, everyone would prepare to gather the necessary team for that darn tournament. Evidently, there would be no exhibition tournament without the presence of future Zeno, so the Warriors would have a bit more time to prepare. In the end, it would be decided that the Warriors participating in the tournament would be Goku, Raditz, Vegeta, Bardock, Nappa, Gine, Goten, Trunks, Piccolo, and Gohan. In Gohan's case, due to his work as a researcher, he had many problems continuing to train, but thanks to his grandmother's support and reminding him to train every now and then, he wouldn't have lost power at all, but neither had he gained more power, simply having the same power he had when Beerus first arrived on Earth. Besides, he had perfectly mastered Super Saiyan God, but that was the extent of his power, which was more than insufficient for the powers likely to be faced in that tournament. Therefore, Bardock would decide to sacrifice another year of his youth to train his grandson as hard and brutally as necessary for the tournament in the Room of Time, being able to stay there a whole day this time, having a bit more time than in the original story. Piccolo, on the other hand, felt that he had been falling behind in terms of power for a long time, not just because he was weak. On the contrary, he was very powerful and trained hard all the time, much more than the original story. But without his fusion with Kami, his true potential would never be fully revealed. Therefore, due to the extreme urgency of obtaining powerful warriors, Kami-sama would finally agree to become one with Piccolo again, as long as he promised that after the tournament he would go to planet Namek to find someone to replace him as Guardian so that Earth would still have Dragon Balls, with Piccolo evidently agreeing. Thanks to this, Piccolo would receive a massive power boost with all his true potential unleashed, now having the same power he canonically had in that saga. After a day and just before the tournament, Bardock and Gohan would come out of the Room of Time, with Gohan having completely surpassed his limits, having fully utilized his potential as a hybrid Saiyan, now being as powerful or perhaps more than the other pure Saiyans, which was no surprise. We're talking about Gohan after all, while at the same time training with someone who could quickly challenge and surpass him in raw power, Bardock, who had also massively increased his power. Additionally, he had unlocked another ability, at least partially, that Whis had been wanting to teach him for some time but had not yet mastered. But now, at least to some extent, he had managed it, now confident that they would win the Tournament of Power. And that confidence would quickly be proven as facts, as just upon arriving at the Tournament of Power, Universe 7, being the most hated of all, would be the most attacked by the other universes. Still, everyone would manage to defeat their adversaries with little or no difficulty, practically a joke at that point, horrifying the other gods of the other universes. Quickly, the vast majority of universes would fall, with Universe 6 and 11 being the only ones offering some resistance, with the Saiyans having some problems with those warriors, especially with Jiren, but also with Caulifla and Kale, who, despite being very inexperienced warriors, were capable of becoming very strong quickly, especially Kale, even losing control in a strange unique form of Super Saiyan, forcing Caulifla to fuse with her to give birth to Kefla. Undoubtedly a formidable opponent, but nothing someone like Gohan, who after his training with his grandfather Bardock, was much more powerful than in the original story. Even having Super Saiyan Blue evolution like Bardock could defeat and still stay in the ring. And so, the whole tournament would proceed in general, with Universe 7 having it very easy. Of course, some fighters would end up falling, like Gine, Goten, and Trunks due to their low powers, and eventually Nappa would fall, always having been the weakest of the main group of Saiyans. And also Piccolo, evidently. But as such, all other universes would have eventually fallen, and even all the Pride Troopers too, leaving only Dispo, Toppo, and Jiren against still Goku, Raditz, Bardock, Vegeta, and Gohan, with the group knowing how to divide their teamwork correctly to easily defeat Dispo. And shortly after Toppo himself, leaving only Jiren to defend his universe. And although undoubtedly Jiren was a formidable adversary, he wasn't unstoppable in this story. given that everyone else was infinitely more powerful than canonically speaking, with Bardock actually offering a good fight with Jiren with his Super Saiyan Blue evolution Kaioken times 20. But eventually he would say it was fun while it lasted at least, briefly recalling the feeling he had in his youth fighting with that mindset. But that was no longer him, and now he preferred to finish fights as soon as possible. Bardock would reveal to everyone that he had managed to reach Ultra Instinct Sign during his training with Gohan in the Room of Time. Bardock would be extremely powerful and skilled, with everyone else far behind the veteran Saiyan, while Jiren would be forced to use his maximum power and beyond to merely equal Bardock's power at that moment. While Bardock, driven to keep up with someone as powerful as Jiren, would gradually adapt and improve his control over Ultra Instinct until eventually perfecting it and reaching his silver form, being able to completely surpass Jiren and defeat him with relative ease. Although an instant later, Bardock would have lost the power completely, being extremely exhausted and worn out, but at least he had done it. Universe 7 had won the Tournament of Power, with the wish made to the Super Dragon Balls to restore all the destroyed universes, with Zeno and Daishinkan being satisfied to see that those mortals had passed the test they were planning. After all that, Universe 7 would return to their universe, with everyone celebrating the victory. Everyone except Bardock, who wanted to have a private talk with his son, as he still hadn't forgiven or accepted the madness his son caused just for the sake of fighting. Goku would argue that in the end, everything turned out fine and no one died, so he didn't understand why it mattered that he had provoked the tournament. But Bardock, infuriated, would tell him that wasn't the point. Despite everything, trillions and trillions of living beings from all over the multiverse died, ceased to exist for a few moments, only to reappear. It must have been a traumatizing and horrible experience for everyone, with most of those people never getting an answer about what happened. It was practically gratuitous and genuine torture for all those beings, just for the enjoyment and pleasure of fighting. Bardock would understand that such was the nature of a Saiyan to be selfish, but at least only during their youth. With age, new perspectives would come to him, realizing that fighting for personal and selfish reasons never ended well in the long term, and he thought that his son, having grown up his whole life on Earth, would think the same. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Goku would apologize to his father, but unfortunately his limited intelligence prevented him from understanding why his father was so upset or the point he was trying to make. In a sad and melancholic tone, Bardock, realizing there was no hope, would finally give up, telling his son that he could go and eat and celebrate with his friends, while Bardock would go home to be alone for a while. The veteran Saiyan hoped with all his heart that someday, when he was old and without the vitality to keep fighting, his son Kakarot would also understand what he meant. But for now, this was the end of this story.